Hello, so we are live. So today I will be reading, or doing the first reading of Hypnotherapy Revealed, the Ericksonian Approach. This is book 2 in my Hypnotherapy Revealed series. So I've read book 1 before, which was Introduction to Hypnotherapy. All of them are available from Amazon, in Kindle, paperback, etc. And you can get them from other bookshops as well. So I've read the previous one. Now I'm going to read this one. If you find this interesting or helpful, feel free to give it a thumbs up. My makeshift bookmark. And if you're not already subscribed and you don't want to miss any of my readings of this book, or you just want to check out other stuff on my channel, then feel free to subscribe. So hello, those of you who are already joining in. I've let people know, because obviously I knew I was going to do this. I've let people know that I'm going to do this. So hopefully there'll be a few more people joining. I think I've worked out roughly how much I need to read for each video. I went through all the pages earlier on today, trying to work out how much book I have to read for and what I'll read in each video. So hopefully I'm about right with what I think. So I will give it just another minute or so for anyone who might be having ads or something that they're watching while they're joining in. The plan today is to read the introduction, the Ericksonian Approach chapter, and then the beginning of the Fundamental Principles chapter. And then tomorrow I will carry on the Fundamental Principles and priming, I think it is. I think that's what I've planned. And so my aim is to get to about page 50-ish today, or 48 or something. Then the next day I'll be working through hypnotic language patterns. I'll carry that on, I think, the day after that, something like that, where I will try and read all the way through to how to craft healing stories. And that means that one's probably going to be a little bit longer, because my therapy in action chapter is a full therapy session transcribed, and the therapy session itself is an hour long, and then there's my transcription cut into it. And I'd rather do all that as one solid kind of video and not break that up, so that I can do that and people can ask me questions or we can interact or whatever. So that means that the chapters beforehand, I want to try and get them finished the day before, just so that I can then just not make that final video even longer. So yes, 7:32, we shall begin. I have a coffee, and I'm sure if I get a dry throat, I might drink some of that coffee. I've also got water as well. So this book will teach you my perspective of the Ericksonian approach to hypnosis and therapy. It will demonstrate the simplicity that I believe underlies the Ericksonian approach, and will teach Ericksonian hypnotic language patterns in a simple and easy to learn and understand way. People often ask whether it's worth taking my online Ericksonian hypnotherapy training, when I say about it being simple and that the hypnotic language patterns are taught in an easy to understand way. They tell me that they had heard it is very complicated to understand and do. I was even told this when I started out as a professional hypnotherapist. I met with experienced hypnotherapists to get advice about setting up in practice. And when I said I was learning an Ericksonian approach, all the hypnotherapists I met told me not to bother with that. It's all too complicated. It doesn't make sense. Just start building up a folder of scripts that you can read to clients and stick to these. This is a myth. The way I teach is from the principles up, not from the language patterns and techniques down. Teaching it from the principles up means that you'll be using all the hypnotic language patterns and techniques automatically and instinctively before you've learned the labels for them consciously. so that by the time you're learning them, they make sense because you recognize that you've been using them already. On my live training, I have people hypnotizing each other unscripted using an Ericksonian approach within 30 minutes. It really is that easy to do. And this gives attendees so much confidence. This often unnerves attendees who've studied hypnotherapy before and only ever used scripts. But for complete beginners who haven't started using scripts as a crutch, this feels such a natural process that they never decide to become script-based hypnotherapists. Hypnotherapy is an unusual therapeutic modality. You don't find counselors, psychotherapists, youth workers, parenting support staff, educational support staff, social workers, family therapists, addiction counselors, cognitive behavioral therapists, psychoanalysts, or any other talking therapy worker feeling they need to do all their work with a script. Yet many hypnotherapists want a script for working with this type of client and a script for working with that type of client. Yet they're doing talking therapy the same as all of these other professionals, but worryingly don't seem to believe in themselves and their training enough to do the therapy. Although I'm teaching an Ericksonian approach in this book, what I really mean is I'm teaching you my perspective on therapy. After more than 20 years doing hypnotherapy, I've developed my own views and understandings and had many aha moments that have shaped my work. Good therapists and trainers who evolve and continually learn and develop end up creating their own unique style. So, for example, hypnotherapy trainer Stephen Brooks, who was the person that first taught Ericksonian technique here in the UK back in the late 1970s, may be thought of as an Ericksonian hypnotherapy trainer, but he teaches his evolution of therapy. Ernest Rossi teaches and does his own evolution of therapy, and their versions of therapy today are very much their own approaches, distinct from how they interpreted Milton Erickson's work when they started out. And so it is for me. I've evolved to practice my own approach. But like with Stephen Brooks, Ernest Rossi, or any other well-known Ericksonian hypnotherapist, I can't just give my approach a different name like Jonesian hypnotherapy, because no one else would have heard of it. Just like no one would have heard of Brooksian or Rossian hypnotherapy. So publicly, I just say I do Ericksonian hypnotherapy. But it's important to note here that I don't think of myself as an Ericksonian hypnotherapist or even a hypnotherapist. I use my interpretation of the Ericksonian approach to underpin how I approach doing therapy. But I think my views of trance and other areas are different to that of Milton Erickson, as you'll see throughout this series. In this book, I share the skills to use so that you can take the knowledge you have from book 1 about hypnosis, pattern matching, the trance nature of reality, and use this therapeutically with clients. The knowledge you'll gain from this book can be mastered, allowing you to be able to confidently hypnotize and therapeutically work with almost anyone using the approach that is right for them as an individual. You'll be able to do what I think of as client-centered hypnotherapy. I often describe myself as employing an Ericksonian approach to therapy. Although I describe myself as that, I don't think of myself as that. I think of myself as someone who does therapy and who tries to take an evidence-based look at the therapy that I do. It's important to me to try things out and find my path, but also to use what the evidence says is most effective at helping people with different presenting problems, and be willing to change what I do and teach in line with evidence, not dogmatically stick to something because I like it. The reason I describe myself as employing an Ericksonian approach to therapy is to associate myself with something familiar to people so that they have a general idea of how I work or what types of skills I may employ. If I started saying that I do a Jonesian approach to therapy, one, it sounds arrogant to me to name an approach after myself. Even Milton Erickson, who the Ericksonian approach is named after, never described himself as doing an Ericksonian approach. And who has ever heard of a Jonesian approach to therapy? Would people know what I was talking about? The difficulty is that everyone has a different view of what different approaches mean to them, me included, and the public have no idea about many approaches. One of the reasons for writing this book is to explain what I do and don't mean when I talk about the Ericksonian approach. The shortest answer to what I mean when talking about using an Ericksonian approach is that I utilize my observations towards a goal. Because I utilize my observations, I am rarely dictatorial, and my therapy can generally look soft and gentle. The only time it isn't soft and gentle is if my observations have led to me taking a different approach in that situation. So, part of the understanding I like people to have of me is that I practice therapy client focused, not therapist focused. I don't try to make clients fit my way of doing therapy. I try to fit their way of doing therapy. This is all fine in relation to other therapists. They may not agree exactly on what they think of when thinking about the Ericksonian approach, but hopefully most therapists think of something which covers these areas. The general public are different, as they won't have heard of the Ericksonian approach. I don't like to call myself a hypnotherapist because all therapists do hypnosis. The only difference is that hypnotherapists publicly admit this and may have had training in hypnosis so that they can do a better job of hypnosis than perhaps a therapist without formal hypnosis training. I'm open about the fact that I practice hypnosis and that I don't like to call myself a hypnotherapist, but I often end up calling myself a hypnotherapist because it's a term the public have some understanding of. And if they have a problem with hypnosis, I want to be open about it and let them voice their concerns so that I can talk to them about hypnosis and debunk any myths that they may hold. The difficulty is that many people have a view on what they think a hypnotherapist is and what they do, and that all hypnotherapists essentially do the same thing. So it's just a case of going to the cheapest one and you should get the same treatment. As if you went to the most expensive the same treatment as if you went to the most expensive therapist. Someone may feel that perhaps the more expensive therapist has more experience or more training. Maybe they're better at what they do. In reality, you can get rubbish hypnotherapists who charge a lot of money and incredible hypnotherapists who charge very little. Each individual will have their own views about what a hypnotherapist does and what their expectations are about having hypnotherapy. It's common for people to think that the hypnotherapist will command them to sleep and will then reprogram their mind. And then during this process, they'll have no awareness because they'll be in a deep trance. And afterwards, their problem will have gone away. If the hypnotherapy isn't 100% successful in that single session, they'll conclude that they can't be hypnotized and it doesn't work for them. If they remember anything from the session or didn't feel hypnotized, they'll conclude they weren't hypnotized and it isn't any good. In his books and lectures, Jeff Zeig talks about finding out from clients what they expect the experience of hypnosis to be like. Obviously, clarifying any misconceptions the client holds and establishing an agreement of what the experience of being hypnotized will be like. And then, as a hypnotherapist, working towards giving the client the experience they feel would constitute as hypnosis and ratifying this with them as being hypnosis. If a client feels hypnosis would be something deeply relaxing, then the therapist could do a deeply relaxing hypnotic induction. If they felt that they would probably lose awareness of their body, then you could do this as an induction. If they thought they would feel energized, then this would be elicited as part of the induction. I mention these problems with description of Ericksonian hypnotherapy because they're both terms linked to me and to what I do, and terms linked to what I'm writing about in this book. And yet almost everyone will have their own views of these terms, meaning two people could think about Ericksonian hypnotherapy and both be thinking about something completely different. I've already shared my perspective on hypnosis, on how hypnotherapy is just hypnosis being used in conjunction with some form of therapy. So you get psychodynamic hypnotherapists, cognitive behavioral hypnotherapists, solution-focused hypnotherapists, client-centered hypnotherapists, etc. Some people use multiple therapeutic approaches and may call themselves an integrative hypnotherapist, curative hypnotherapists, etc. Others may use a label of an approach to hypnotherapy or to convey their training. So you may have Ericksonian hypnotherapists, medical hypnotherapists, clinical hypnotherapists. Then you get people describing themselves by what they focus on treating, like smoking cessation hypnotherapists, gastric band hypnotherapists, weight loss hypnotherapists, hypnobirthing practitioner. In this section, I'll cover what I mean when I talk about the Ericksonian approach and what I don't mean, as well as sharing about hypnotic language patterns, therapeutic storytelling, observation skills, paradoxical interventions, and what I consider the fundamental principles of the Ericksonian approach. The Ericksonian approach is named after Milton H. Erickson. He didn't refer to what he did as being Ericksonian. I think the first record of the term Ericksonian was in a presentation by Jeff Zeig in 1977. At the time Ericksonian was first used, Milton Erickson was still alive. The term was used for the first Ericksonian Congress. Erickson died in 1980, before the Congress took place. However, he seems to have been okay with the term being used, but I don't think he would really have wanted to have thousands of therapists out there claiming to do his approach to therapy. When no one really knew what it was that they were doing and calling Ericksonian, because there was nothing written down to define the Ericksonian approach. Some practitioners focused on the therapeutic techniques, others on the hypnotic language patterns, others on aspects of what he did, like focusing on being indirect, using metaphors and stories, or being strategic, and some focused on trying to find a therapeutic model or deeper theory behind Erickson's work. Many different approaches to therapy arose or were influenced from therapists studying the work of Erickson, like solution-focused therapies, strategic therapy, family therapy, systems therapy, neurolinguistic programming. Erickson himself often stated, "Don't try to imitate my voice or my cadence. Just discover your own, develop your own techniques, be your own natural self." He encouraged people to learn different approaches, techniques, and theories, to study different subjects like anatomy and anthropology, to develop observation skills, but to then find their own path and develop their own approach. I feel that many people have overcomplicated the Ericksonian approach. That isn't to say that there isn't complexity, just that I feel there is simplicity underlying the complexity. Simplicity also doesn't mean easy. Learning the rules of chess is simple, but that doesn't mean once you know the rules, you're a chess master. You have to practice and learn. In chess, you may learn different strategies, different combinations of moves, which seem to work well under certain circumstances. As a beginner, you may over-rely on these moves and use them when it would have been best to do something else. As you practice, you get better at seeing the layout of the board and how the game is likely to go over the next few moves, perhaps even having an idea of what moves you may be doing in 10 moves' time. With even more practice, you learn to be flexible and start to adapt and change your approach as you get feedback by what your opponent does, and eventually you can become very proficient at the game. So learning the rules of chess is easy. Mastering chess takes focused practice and hard work. There are many descriptions or definitions of what an Ericksonian approach is. Some people talk about Ericksonian hypnotherapy or Ericksonian hypnosis, others Ericksonian psychotherapy. Some now talk about conversational hypnosis or hypnotherapy, or indirect hypnosis or hypnotherapy. Personally, I see indirect hypnosis and conversational hypnosis, etc., as not being an Ericksonian approach, but being approaches inspired by aspects of Erickson's work. Indirect hypnosis is an approach developed by Stephen Brooks, and conversational hypnosis was developed by Igor Ledhovsky. Here are some definitions of Ericksonian approach from across the internet. Ericksonian hypnotherapy, or indirect metaphorical hypnosis, is the term used to describe a very specific type of hypnosis, which is hallmarked by the use of indirect suggestion, metaphor, and storytelling, as opposed to the direct type of suggestion that was its predecessor. Ericksonian hypnosis is a method of indirect hypnosis named after Dr. Milton Erickson. These sites go on to give fuller explanations about Erickson's work and contributions, about different techniques he employed, and differentiating between Erickson's approach, where he would often use an indirect, permissive, and conversational approach, versus what has become termed traditional hypnotherapy, which is usually more direct and formulaic, often using generic scripts and about the hypnotist doing something to a client rather than evoking something from within a client. Obviously, this is a generalization, and there are times an Ericksonian hypnotherapist will be direct and times a traditional hypnotherapist will be more permissive. Erickson described hypnosis as the communication of ideas and understandings for the purpose of eliciting responsive behavior at both psychological and physiological levels, and trance as active unconscious learning. He described what he did as accepting and utilizing clients' responses, stating, "All I know is that they'll respond in an appropriate fashion, in a way which best suits them as an individual. And so I become intrigued with wonder exactly how their unconscious will choose to respond. And so I comfortably await their response, knowing that when it occurs, I can accept it and utilize it." Talking about therapeutic orientation, Erickson said, "I invent a new theory and a new approach for each individual." Erickson used what he felt was right for the client and the situation, whether this was direct, indirect, using metaphors or tasks, or any other technique, ideas, or approaches. My perspective of an Ericksonian approach isn't about focusing on any of these areas. It isn't about being indirect. Erickson was frequently very direct, right through to the end of his life. Although it is true he used more indirect techniques than traditional hypnotherapists, and he felt that being indirect, gentle, and permissive was often the best approach to take, where being direct could elicit resistance. It isn't about always being metaphorical, as Erickson often appeared to use stories from his own life, or about nature, or things which were familiar to the client, like talking about baseball and muscle control with a child with an interest in baseball, and who also wet the bed, as a way of teaching them about controlling their bladder and helping them to understand that they have the knowledge, they just need to transfer that knowledge of muscle control to another part of their body. He also set metaphorical tasks like climbing a mountain to think about a relationship, or having a heroin addict search for two identical blades of grass. It is about being client-centered and doing what is right for the client in front of you, while authentically being yourself. If the therapist is doing this, they'll likely naturally be more permissive and use more indirect methods with most clients. With the focus people often have on certain aspects of the Ericksonian approach, and clients that are often made by Ericksonian hypnotherapists, and claims that are often made by Ericksonian hypnotherapists, and were made by Erickson himself, it is helpful to explore what research says about various aspects of what most people see as the Ericksonian approach. In the article, Ericksonian Hypnosis, a review of the empirical data, Ericksonian hypnosis is described as having four basic assumptions. Hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness. There are markers of this altered state that distinguish it from the waking state. Hypnotizability of the subject client is more a function of the hypnotist's skill than the subject's ability. The use of indirect hypnosis, hypnotic suggestion, is, at least in some instances, more effective in producing hypnotic responses than is direct suggestion. The research doesn't favor the Ericksonian view of hypnosis, outlined with these 4 points. I'll discuss some of the research shortly, but I would disagree with some of these assumptions as being what defines the Ericksonian approach. The Erickson Foundation defines Ericksonian therapy as an experiential, phenomenologically based approach to problem solving that utilizes existing client attributes while evoking natural processes of learning and adaptation. I've already shared about Erickson viewing hypnosis as an altered state, which differs from the points above, and what he meant by that, which differs from the definition used above. In a presentation in 1960, Erickson discussed hypnosis. He shared, "I regard hypnotic techniques as essentially no more than a means of asking your subject or patients to pay attention to you so that you can offer them some ideas which can initiate them into an activation of their own capacities to behave." He then continued talking about this special state of awareness or consciousness, which led to him being questioned about his use of these terms. He clarified with, "I would like to respond to Dr. Sabin's comments about an altered state of awareness. If I wanted Dr. Sabin to say a large number of very pleasant things, I think I would introduce him into a setting where there was soft music and flowers, and sufficient other attractions, which would induce in him the desire to say a number of nice, soft words. However, if I introduced him into a situation where I was tormenting a dog, I expect I could induce him to say a great many unpleasant things. You alter a person's state of awareness by the conditions associated with and the character of the stimulation which you offer, along with the inner behavior of potentials in that person. I do not think that I'm in error to give the general term state of awareness to the memories, ideas, and emotions characterizing a person at a given time, nor do I consider this a mystical appellation." Erickson observed that what people could do in hypnosis could be done outside of hypnosis. The difference was hypnosis helped narrow the client's attention on what is important. And just like when you turn down music and stop talking when you try to park a car, you do things better when you pay them your full attention. There may not be any clear sign of an altered state distinguishable from the waking state, but as mentioned earlier in the book, there is evidence of changes in neural activity associated with increased focus of attention, enhanced somatic and emotional control, and reduced self-consciousness, which could be described as an altered or special state of awareness, as Erickson described it. There were areas Erickson was likely wrong. For example, he claimed that hypnotized subjects were more literal than non-hypnotized subjects. Research on literalism in and out of hypnosis has found no evidence of this, so it's likely that Erickson perhaps influenced his own results by knowing what his theories and expectations were. For point 3, that hypnotizability of the client is more a function of the hypnotist's skill than the client's ability, I would argue that it depends on how you think about utilization and about hypnosis. I've shared already that I wonder whether what I do is hypnosis or not, because what I would label hypnosis is very broad, so broad that it makes the definition meaningless. I think that hypnotizability is a function of the client's ability rather than the function of the hypnotist's skill. The role of the hypnotherapist is to facilitate the client's innate abilities, to support them in experiencing hypnosis, and in the case of therapy, to support them in working towards their therapeutic outcome. The therapist actually does as little as possible. Erickson described that hypnosis should primarily be the outcome of a situation in which interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships are developed constructively to serve the purpose of both the hypnotist and the subject. Whatever the part played by the hypnotist may be, the role of the subject involves the greater amount of active functioning which derives from the capabilities, learnings, and experiential history of their total personalities. Hypnotists can only guide, direct, supervise, and provide the opportunity for subjects to do the productive work. The article gives an example of a story Erickson told about his 3-year-old son Robert falling over and requiring stitches, and the intervention which helped Robert through the situation. Erickson directed Robert's attention to the pain and acknowledged the pain Robert was experiencing. He then directed his attention to the colour of the blood and to counting how many stitches he received. Erickson said that the question could be asked about when hypnosis was employed. Erickson said that the question could be asked about when hypnosis was employed and stated that hypnosis began with the first statement to him and became apparent when he gave his full and undivided interest and pleased attention to each of the succeeding events that constituted the medical handling of his problem. The article used this as an example of the creative utilization that Erickson would employ to help bring relief to people, but questioned whether this was hypnosis and that it could just have been a distraction technique, that Erickson was more interested in whether an intervention worked rather than how the intervention would be defined. This is an important point in relation to the Ericksonian approach. I wouldn't call it Ericksonian hypnosis, indirect hypnosis, or conversational hypnosis. What is important are the Ericksonian principles. And although we'll cover hypnotic language patterns, it isn't about the hypnotic language patterns or about whether you're doing hypnosis. It's about whether you're doing what is right for your client in that moment, which involves applying your knowledge in a client-focused way. It could easily be said that what Erickson was doing with Robert isn't hypnosis, because if it gets classed as hypnosis, it means almost anything involving guiding and focusing attention is hypnosis. To me, if I had to give it a definition, I would say it is hypnosis. It isn't a structured induction to find something to focus on, that spot on the wall, for example, and to pay that thing all of your attention, like paying the spot on the wall all of your attention, and in doing so, shutting out stimuli that isn't within that focused attention, and then moving this attention elsewhere after beginning to follow the presented ideas, like inside into thoughts and feelings when suggested. Instead, attention is focused on elements of the ongoing experience and directed from one part of the experience to another, narrowing that focus of attention away from other thoughts, feelings, and external stimuli towards those aspects of the ongoing experience. And at each stage, Robert is following the suggestions for where to focus. The fourth point about the use of indirect suggestions is an interesting one. Research currently seems to point to indirect suggestion being about as effective as direct suggestion, not more effective. There are some circumstances where direct suggestion seems more effective, and other times indirect suggestion comes out on top. But there isn't much in it. Between the two, indirect suggestion may be better at producing post-hypnotic behavior than direct suggestion. But it seems indirect suggestion is no different than direct suggestion in trying to have success with resistant clients. One of the claims about Ericksonian hypnosis is often that you are indirect to get around or utilize resistance. This is a complex issue. It depends on what is being thought of as resistance. If a client doesn't want to be hypnotized, they may well just decide to ignore the suggestion, regardless of whether they were given it directly or indirectly. If, on the other hand, they're given a suggestion to follow, and they don't respond to the suggestion despite wanting to, or to be direct could mismatch the client in some way, then I would say that it makes sense to be indirect, and being indirect may well work. Currently, there isn't research to back this up, so I can only draw upon my own experiences and the experiences of hypnotherapists I know. If I suggest an arm levitation to a client and they want to be hypnotized, they want the levitation to work, and their arm just sits on their lap, they may perceive this as failure, and this could impact on future successes. It doesn't matter whether they're in hypnosis or not, according to a hypnotizability scale. Their subjective experience would be that it isn't working. If, on the other hand, I suggest that they pay attention to their hand and notice what that hand feels like, notice whether it feels heavy or light, warm or cool, etc., then utilized whatever the client told me was happening and fed this back to them to deepen their focus around whatever ideas and experiences they had shared, then there would be no failure. Again, this is regardless of whether they would be deemed hypnotized or not, according to hypnotizability scales. Indirect suggestion doesn't make the client more likely to follow the suggestion, as is often claimed in courses, where they may state that because the suggestions are indirect or conversational, they go undetected and are followed because the conscious mind hasn't recognized them, so they don't put up resistance. This type of view is incorrect. It is true that sometimes indirect suggestion may go unrecognized, but the person still has the choice whether they'll follow the suggestion or not. About half of subjects may not follow any given suggestion. Obviously, in therapy, the client will be more likely to follow suggestions and presented ideas because they are there to get help overcoming a problem, and it would be counterproductive to them to not engage with the therapy to some extent. And there is research that, unlike indirect suggestions, indirect approaches work. For example, telling a teen to stay awake all night as an indirect approach to getting them to fall asleep, depending on exactly what the therapist is doing, indirect techniques aren't totally covert. Intelligent and observant subjects can notice or work out what the therapist is doing. Research seems to also point towards clients feeling more resistance towards therapists who use indirect suggestion compared to direct suggestion. This could be because, depending on how indirect suggestions are presented, they can feel manipulative, and like people experience from salespeople who are trying to manipulate them into making an unwanted purchase and doing so indirectly. Whereas using an indirect approach, like presenting a metaphor to help a client with their problem, is often seen as positive, and the client feels a sense of trust towards the therapist. So objective responses, like the actual depth of hypnosis and responses to suggestions, are no different between indirect or direct suggestions. But subjective responses, like how the subject feels and what they think about the experience, are different, with a greater number of subjects being more resistant towards the hypnotist when indirect suggestions are used, but possibly also feeling more hypnotized. Hypnotherapy researchers feel that these areas mentioned above aren't what makes the Ericksonian approach. It isn't the indirect language patterns or the definition and ideas of hypnosis and hypnotizability that Erickson held. What the Ericksonian approach could be understood as is having the ability to increase clients' motivation, expectancy, and belief that therapeutic change can and will occur. To me, the Ericksonian approach isn't a therapy. Milton Erickson had many therapeutic ideas and thoughts based on his knowledge and experience, and would develop effective and often creative ways of helping people. But if you strip back the therapeutic work and strip back the hypnotic interventions, what you find is that underlying it all are some simple fundamental principles. This is what I want to share in the next chapter. It's these fundamental principles which have resulted in so many different styles of the Ericksonian approach. The therapeutic approach which arises is unique to the therapist applying the fundamental principles and their training, knowledge, and experience. The Ericksonian approach itself isn't the therapy, but the principles therapy is carried out through, or the attitude to therapy, as I prefer to think of it. So a Jungian analyst could start doing their therapy through the principles of the Ericksonian approach, as could a solution-focused therapist, or a cognitive behavioral therapist, or any other therapist. The way you can see many different therapists doing very different therapy, but all using an Ericksonian approach. I did a job where I had to work in a psychodynamic way. So while I was in that job, I took an Ericksonian approach attitude. All documents I had to fill out were completed as per the approach I was using. Anyone watching me work would see that I was using a psychodynamic approach to my therapeutic work. But underlying it all the time was the Ericksonian approach. I used to describe that I was being Ericksonian. I think of it as something you make a part of who you are rather than something you do. I wasn't doing Ericksonian approach, I was being Ericksonian. A few years later, I was doing a role which required me to do a very different therapeutic approach. I had to use a solution-focused approach. I generally prefer using a solution-focused approach compared to a psychodynamic approach, but used purely, and as it's often taught, can still be restrictive and not as client-centered as I would like. So I used a solution-focused approach to my therapeutic work, but underlying this was the Ericksonian approach. This is what I hope to help you see here, that whatever therapeutic orientation you have, it will come with a set structure of ways of thinking about things, which may have validity in some contexts, but may be restrictive in others. And becoming client-centered through the development of the Ericksonian approach will help you to expand your hypnosis and therapeutic skills. It can also be applied to other areas of life. Following the chapter on the fundamental principles of the Ericksonian approach, I cover hypnotic language patterns. What I've done with the language patterns is to simplify them by chunking different patterns into categories. So, for example, what I call the agreement set consists of the yes set and the reverse yes set. Linking suggestions consist of compound suggestions and contingent suggestions. There are many books which break down hypnotic language patterns into smaller and smaller chunks. From my years of teaching, what I've found is that when people are presented with vast amounts of information, they become overwhelmed and confused. Students and those new to hypnotherapy would focus so much on trying to work out what language pattern they're supposed to use here and there that they would tell me they don't think they're very good because they always forget the different patterns. When I teach hypnosis, 30 minutes into my training, I have people hypnotizing each other unscripted. 15 minutes of that 30 minutes was spent introducing myself and saying what the course will cover. The other 15 minutes was telling students how to do hypnosis without scripts and doing a demonstration. Then I tell them to pair up and get on with it. I don't teach them hypnotic language patterns at this time. I let them do the hypnosis. Then during discussion about how they got on, I share with them how they will have been intuitively using hypnotic language patterns just because they were using the fundamental principles. I don't want them to have their focus on the language patterns. I want their focus on the client. This is why I teach in this way. I like to start broadly so that students are hypnotizing and using hypnotic language patterns without knowing the names of the patterns or realizing that they're using them. Then I like to teach them what I would term classes of language patterns, like linking suggestions or the agreement set. This keeps the language pattern learning easy. What I find happens on courses is that once students learn a class of language patterns, like the agreement set, they recognize it as something they were using already. Now they know about that class of language patterns, they can practice it and use it more. They don't have to try to learn the names of the different language patterns within that class. This is especially the case with language patterns like double binds. I just teach it as double binds, but there are many types of double binds. When I used to teach each individual language pattern, students would lack confidence because they would say they couldn't remember the different binds when they were trying to work with someone. I've known many hypnotherapists who I feel are highly skilled and do a great job tell me the same thing, that they struggle to remember all the different language patterns and how and when to use them. If the student learns the fundamental principles of the Ericksonian approach, they'll be using the language patterns automatically. If they learn the classes of language patterns, they'll be more conscious about the hypnotic language that they're using and will be using many of the language patterns without knowing the individual names of each pattern. If the student is still interested in knowing more and learning the various language patterns in detail, like the names of the different types of double binds, then they can go and do this. But I'd recommend doing this after they've made all the prior knowledge instinctive and they understand it all, so that even if they don't remember the names of a specific language pattern, they know this doesn't matter. They're more than confident in using all the classes of language patterns and the fundamental principles. There are three fundamental principles that I feel underpin the Ericksonian approach: observation, utilization, and having a goal or a direction. From these three fundamental principles, much of the complexity of the Ericksonian approach develops naturally. When working with clients, it's important to know what you're working towards or trying to achieve. and to then make observations and utilize these observations in the direction of that goal. So if a therapist observes that someone is anxious and holding on to the arm of the chair, and the goal is to help them to relax, then they can utilize the gripping by suggesting you can put all that tension in that grip, focusing physical and emotional tension in one place. Or, as you grip that arm of the chair with all of your tension, I wonder how quickly you'll relax, presupposing relaxation and linking tension in the grip with relaxing. Or while you grip that arm of the chair, another part of you can relax, linking the gripping with relaxing. Or I don't know whether you'll discover gripping the chair leads to relaxation spreading through the rest of your body, or whether you find your mind drifts and wanders and dreams. Linking gripping with the double bind, either the gripping will lead to relaxation or the gripping will lead to the mind wandering and drifting into a dreamlike state. Or a whole range of other suggestions that are hypnotic language patterns, but the focus isn't on the language pattern. The language patterns develop naturally from utilizing the observations towards that goal. Observation skills are something that therapists should continuously practice and refine. When watching clients, observation is the key to discovering what to work with and feed back to the client. If a client twitches at a key point, perhaps in response to a specific idea being presented, or maybe at a point during a period of inner work, then the therapist would acknowledge this. All of the client's micro movements and unconscious movements can be acknowledged towards the desired goal. This goal may be the therapeutic goal, or it may be a series of goals. So firstly, it could be the goal of developing trance, then the goal of going to a specific place in the mind, then the goal of post-hypnotic suggestions or future therapeutic success. When I first learned about congruency between conscious and unconscious messages, I wanted to know how I could practice this and refine it as a skill. The best way I found was to watch people, watch them in bars, clubs, restaurants, parks, anywhere where you get to observe people interacting. By doing this, you can listen to conversations at the same time as objectively watching non-verbal behavior. Another place to watch this is on reality TV shows. I used to record reality TV shows each week and watch interactions between the people on the shows to see what I could figure out about the people based on mismatching communication. I would then make predictions based on my observations and watch future episodes of the show to see what predictions were accurate and which weren't, and what I missed. As I got feedback from watching the shows, I'd refine and update my predictions. This is a great learning process. You can watch people talking and look for patterns. Doing this, you don't get to ask questions, but you can pay your full attention because you aren't involved. Anyone with knowledge of magic who watches a magician knows that if the magician is captivating enough, people will miss what they do, even though they perhaps know what they were looking for. And that sleight of hand, or whatever it happens to be, occurred right under their nose. This is the same with starting out doing therapy. You have lots of knowledge. You know what you can observe, but miss it when you're in a real situation, because you have too much to take in and too much you're thinking about. As you watch people, you may work by initially just getting a sense of something, or you may actively look for patterns that you could tell someone else, like change in facial color, change in the fullness of the lips, body posture, eye contact. The best way to learn to recognize minimal cues is to focus on one cue at a time while you learn, so that you get used to noticing that cue, like focusing on observing the breathing pattern, or observing the pulse in the neck, or observing changes to skin color or changes in the eyes. What you do with the observations depends on what you're observing. It could be to look for congruence, or it could be to look for a specific state. If it is for a state, then you can suggest back the minimal cues you observe for that state. So if you wanted to induce a deep trance, comment or acknowledge the minimal cues, overtly or indirectly, each time you see a trance-based minimal cue. You could link it to going deeper, for example, by saying, as you continue to blink in that special way, you can drift deeper. Well, that's right. said on each blink or sign of ideomotor movement. If you wanted to help the person develop a state of confidence, then you would do this with minimal cues linked to that confidence, like perhaps changes to voice tonality or straightening the back and putting the shoulders back. The easiest way of noticing minimal cues is to be in an externally focused trance on the client. This way, you'll be better able to notice and respond to minimal cues and see connections between the different cues you observe. This also develops with clinical practice and training, not just training around minimal cues, but also training around what issues you're learning to treat. To switch a client's trance focus from internal to external or external to internal, you can start by matching the experience, then guiding it to where it is wanted. For example, you could say to the client, you can be aware of the ticking clock or the traffic outside, of the sound of my breathing, and you can notice what those hands feel like resting on your lap while you wonder what will happen next. And before you discover what will happen next, you can notice which hand feels the heaviest and wonder whether one of those hands will lift. So you're constantly becoming more internally focused. To do this the other way, reverse the process and match ongoing internal experience. Then you can ask the client to remain in this state while they open their eyes and pay their full attention honestly and completely to whatever the external thing is, reading, practicing an instrument, etc. With leisure activities, you can have an external focus activity and guide it internally, even by saying, I sense you can feel some of that now. Many people think too narrowly about observation. They perhaps look at breathing patterns, pulse, pupil dilation, head movement, changes to skin color, blood flow to the lips, gestures, body posture, movements, and other physiological cues. Some people will also observe for language use, different emphasis the client gives to different words, what metaphors the client uses, their choice of words, any hesitations and other aspects auditorily, any other auditory aspects of the ongoing situation. Building on this, some therapists may observe the wider situation, like sounds of traffic or other sounds in the building, any distractions which occur, and any other environmental stimuli. This level of observation is just on what is occurring in the moment. What is needed is to broaden the observation out to include the client as a whole. Things like, what type of a person are they? What is their family history? What is or was their place in the family? What does this inform you about how they may respond to things? What type of jobs have they done? How do they respond to different types of situations? What's important to them? What do they enjoy? What motivates them, makes them passionate to take action? What's their wider life like? What meets their different innate needs? What are their hopes and dreams? What do they want life to be like now and in the future? You also want to broaden your observations to include your learnings. So, for example, if a client says they are depressed and you know about the cycle of depression, I would class this knowledge as an observation to be utilized. Just knowing the cycle of depression means when a client tells you that they're depressed, you can talk about sleep difficulties you know that they're likely to have. You can talk about worry thinking they're likely to do. You can talk about them feeling exhausted and struggling with motivation. It may be that for the specific client, they don't have all these issues, but your knowledge gives you a starting point, something that can likely be utilized. You will also know that the client is likely to have one or more innate needs not being met or being inappropriately met. So you know to explore this. So you're utilizing your knowledge, or in this case, your observations about what it means for someone to be depressed. The more the therapist learns about different things from child development, psychology, social psychology, whatever issues you'll be working with, and any issues which may arise with clients in therapy, as well as about different cultural and religious viewpoints, the better able to draw on this information the therapist will be, and the more they will have access to utilize when working with the client. Learning the 3 principles of the Ericksonian approach is easy, but to master applying the Ericksonian approach takes learning and extensive practice. Effective therapists will continue to practice and study and develop themselves. If they have a client with an interest that they don't know much about, they'll learn something about that interest so that they can better help the client. When I worked in children's homes, whenever a new child was coming into the home, we would receive the child's care plan a few days beforehand. This care plan would say many things about the child, including their hobbies and interests, and things like their favourite football team. I have no interest in football, but I'd always go and learn a bit about the subject in the care plan so that I could interact meaningfully with the child when they come into the home. I would learn about their favourite football team and how well or badly they are currently doing, how they've done over recent years, any significant changes over recent years, any planned changes in the near future, any significant games which have been played and they are playing, or which they are to be played, what kits they wear, where they're located in the country. I've got no idea about football, but I want to be able to be authentic in my interactions. And it could arise that I have something helpful to say or something I need to address with them. And being able to use their interests and communicate from within something they know, love, and understand is very helpful. This is the kind of thing I expect of good therapists. It is all much easier now with the internet. When I was doing this, I used to have to go to the library to find all the information out. The best way to observe successfully is to observe with curiosity. So you watch people and wonder about what you observe. If you see a possible pattern, wonder, what was that about? Why did they do that? Watch clients and look for patterns. Anyone that has knowledge of magic and watches a magician knows that if the magician is captivating enough, you miss what they do, even though it's happened right under your nose. This is the same when starting out doing therapy. You know lots of stuff, but miss it when you're in the real situation because you have too much to take in. Practice by watching people. As you watch people, you may work by initially just getting a sense of something, or you may actively look for patterns that you could tell someone else, like changes to facial color, etc. The best way to learn to recognize minimal cues is to focus on one at a time. What you do with observation depends on what you're observing for. Where am I? Often therapists focus on the content of problems. It's more helpful to focus on the pattern of the problem. For the problem to be a problem, there'll be a pattern playing out. This pattern may happen across contexts, so many seemingly unrelated issues may actually be related. You may not discover what initially caused the original pattern, but you can find the one pattern that's happening in many areas and address that one pattern. When observing, the therapist can look for patterns in behavior that reveal additional information, like someone rubbing their neck while talking about a partner. And when the therapist changes subject and returns to talking about their partner, they do the same again, implying the person is a pain in the neck. Or while they tell you that they want to change, you see them pushing their feet into the ground. And again, when the therapist changes subject and then returns to the subject, they do the same again, communicating that they're digging their heels in about the issue of changing and perhaps are unlikely to be ready to change yet. It's important to check out observations. Many years ago, I was in a job interview and kept putting my right arm across my lap and my left arm over my right arm, holding it in place. I'd just recently been hit by a truck and sustained injuries to my right arm. So whenever I sat on a chair without suitable armrests, I'd rest my arm across my lap and hold it in place with my other arm, as this was the most comfortable position and gave me the least pain. Following the interview, I got to see the interviewer's notes. The interviewers were trained in NLP and so had learned about observation skills. However, what they wrote about the interview was that most of the time I had my arms crossed on my lap, and so I was clearly defensive and resistant and reluctant to be open and honest. They clearly hadn't checked out their observations and remained open-minded until the evidence pointed in a specific direction. They didn't check whether I was crossing my arms because I was cold or whether as was the case, I was crossing my arms for comfort due to an injury. I had been open and honest in telling them about recently being involved in a road accident, being hospitalized, and sustaining significant injuries to my arm. But they didn't link this information I told them to my ongoing behavior. They didn't ask questions, then change topics and come back to the topic and see if I repeated the behavior. Or just ask me something like, I'm curious about you crossing your arms. To check out your observations, you can change the topic or do something else to change the state of the client, and then return to the topic again and see if the client goes to doing the same behavior once you change back to the topic. You can also ask them about behaviors and observations and observe how they respond. Here is a selection of minimal cues that can be observed. It's helpful to make observations for utilization and for deeper understanding. For example, if there's a mismatch between the conscious and non-conscious communication, this can be utilized, but also it teaches a lot about the person and their presenting problem or solution. Generally, if there's a mismatch in communication, the non-conscious communication is likely to be the honest, authentic communication. But to know this for sure, the therapist needs to test the observations. So you can observe for heartbeat, looking at the ankle, temple, or throat, facial color changes, reddening, whiting of the face, etc. Eye movements, eye contact, tension and relaxation in parts of the face or other parts of the body, thickening or narrowing of the lips due to blood flow, tensing or relaxing of lips, head position, head movement, eyes widening or narrowing, micro expressions, throat movements, swallowing, body position, body posture, arm, hand, or feet or leg movements, positions of the arms, hands, feet, or legs, differences and similarities between verbal reports and non-verbal behavior, metaphorical behaviors, tone of voice, speed of speech, pauses and emphasis given during speech, quality of speech, types of words used, amount of information or types of information given or not spoken, subtle changes to speech like wavering voice, changes in pitch or firmer voice, gestures used, breathing rate and type of breathing and changes to breathing like hesitant breathing or holding breath at certain times or breathing faster or slower depending on what's going on at the time, perspiration, metaphors used, patterns, self-soothing, self-punishing behaviors, anxiety behaviors. And that's where I'm going to stop for now. That's page 50. And that was pretty much, I'd reckon that would take me an hour. That's an hour, probably taken me an hour. So I'm going to have some of my drink now. Now that I've talked for an hour. So there's lots and lots of comments. I'm just scrolling through some of the comments. I'll just try and do that very quickly though. Yeah, every therapist, in my opinion, also should be client focused rather than therapist focused. It's great to see many of you here, by the way. Yeah, obviously the idea is now I can take some questions and things, but it's easier for me just to read so that I know I've read everything I need to read. It kind of varies. Sometimes I think there are times when I think when I come to like the language patterns, I'll probably do bits and then talk because I'll be doing the language patterns obviously as the demonstrations. But the other thing with the research paper is, well, it's not another thing, it's what I've kind of said, is that obviously it's based on them defining the approach that they're going to base the research on and then disproving their definition. So, they're kind of saying, our definition of the Ericksonian approach is X, Y, and Z, and we tested X, Y, and Z in research studies, and it doesn't stack up. But then if you come along and say, but I don't agree that that's what it is, then they've technically not tested what someone else might think it is. Yeah, it is a bit like, worrying whether the name of your food is right, um, rather than whether it tastes any good. Uh, the Two Blades of Grass with the heroin addict is a specific case Milton Erickson did. So a way of treating someone with who had heroin addiction. He told them to go out in the garden and find him two blades of grass and return with those two blades of grass that were identical. They had to go and find two identical blades of grass. And obviously, there are no two identical blades of grass. When you observe them closely, you notice that every single blade of grass is different. And that was what he wanted them to understand, that it's all different, and yet the whole garden is beautiful, etc., etc., etc. All the stuff that I've talked about before. But I obviously give the references in there, in sort of at the back of where it all is. Yeah, so the important thing with the indirect suggestion versus indirect kind of, um, just being a bit more indirect at times, is that when it's actual kind of techniques, it comes across sometimes very manipulative and very false and like, a dodgy salesperson. But yeah, so you can find obviously among Erickson's works, and if you've got the book I recommended the other day, the An Uncommon Case book, when I did the video talking about all of, well, many of the Erickson books behind me. Um, I think I talked about a bunch of them, um, but obviously in that book where it says here are all the cases, you could look up that specific case and then see all the references to which books it's in, and it would obviously give a summary in that book, but then you can go and read it in the other books, in context with how Erickson's talking about it, where he goes into more detail in different contexts. um, People feel more hypnotized because, so you gain more resistance. So this is the indirect suggestions result in more resistance, but the client feels more hypnotized. You gain more resistance because it feels manipulative. So if you're with someone who's suddenly talking funny and seeming to constantly trap you at every turn, in the way they're using language, etc., that gets more resistance because it feels really manipulative when it's done in a kind of very overt way, rather than just dropping in the odd, um, kind of dropping it in conversationally. So I'm not talking about conversational hypnosis. I'm talking about literally just kind of I'm curious when that happens, and just carrying on moving on. Where you use it sparingly as part of your just normal conversation, like people always do. So it's very common for, say, you have a couple sitting on a sofa. One of them gets up and starts walking towards the kitchen, maybe carrying plates to the kitchen or something, and then the other one says, "Oh, would you put the kettle on while you're in there?" And then that person who's just gone to the kitchen now comes back with a cup of tea. You never said, "Make me a cup of tea." So in normal everyday conversations, we do indirect hypnosis. We do these sort of the indirect techniques. Um, if the person had, and it's about context and timing and everything like that. So if the couple were sitting side by side, and you just say to them, "Nip to the kitchen and put the kettle on," they're going to think, "No, do it yourself." Generally, um, likewise, even if you try to do that indirectly, like sort of, "God, could really do with a cup of tea." It'd be like, "Yeah, you're trying to manipulate me and make me go and get you a cup of tea." So it doesn't fit that context. But if the person is already walking into the kitchen carrying stuff, it kind of makes sense that perhaps they could turn the kettle on. And if they've turned the kettle on, they may as well. They're kind and loving and caring, and they like you, and they, want to make you happy or whatever. It makes sense that they might just think, "I'm going to be really kind and I'm going to make them a cup of drink." So the context and the timing and everything fits when it's done like in a more sort of, I don't know what the right term would be, maybe gentle way, or a more normal kind of way where it fits. It's a bit like body language. If you in NLP, lots of people are taught about matching and mirroring body language, but what you end up with is people doing it, making others feel really uncomfortable. So the person sits opposite you and crosses their arms, and you cross your arms, and they think, "I just did that. You're just copying me." But if the person crosses their crosses their arms in context with thinking, "No, I don't really think I am that way," and that's why they've crossed their arms, because they've got that kind of mentality and they've gone into that state. And then when you get to that kind of, "Well, really, I do, I don't think that you're taking this serious," and you then get into that mentality, and so you cross your arms in context with the reason why and the way they cross their arms. You don't mirror, you don't copy the person. You're doing it as part of, "I'm trying to be like you. I'm trying to demonstrate that I perceive the world in a very similar way to you. So when I feel that kind of way, I will do similar behaviors to what I see you do when you feel that kind of way." So that's kind of what you should be doing, not just copying someone instantly. So it's the same thing here, that if you're doing indirect suggestions and it comes across really manipulative and like you're trying to make someone do something, that builds resistance. The reason why people feel more hypnotized is because generally stuff feels like it happens automatically. So there's a difference between saying to someone, um, "Your right arm is about to lift up. It's lifting, lifting. Your right arm is getting lighter and lighter. It's lifting higher and higher. There's a balloon attached to that right arm, filling even more with helium. That right arm's lifting higher and higher and higher, getting even higher into the sky." And their arm may go up or it may not, but they don't feel. A lot of people will say, "I kind of felt like, because this man is staring at me and telling me all this, that I just chose to lift my arm up." Whereas if you say, "Look at that hand, and I'm really curious about what's going to happen to it as it lifts into the air." And I don't know whether it's going to start lifting perhaps from the fingertips, maybe from the elbow, maybe from the wrist. I don't know, but just keep watching that hand and let's just see what happens. And then they start noticing movement, maybe a finger twitches. So that's it. Just letting that finger twitch, and I wonder how that movement's going to spread through the rest of the hand. And then before they know it, the arm's beginning to float up into the air, and they think, "I definitely didn't do that. I was watching my hand the whole time. It moved on its own." So they feel more hypnotized because they feel like they weren't doing it. So that's kind of the disparity there, that they're more resistant. So if you do a really bad job of it, they're gonna kind of resist you more. But it just feels like it was more automatic, like somehow this just happened from within them. Um, Whereas generally, if someone's just being very direct, then that directness, you feel like you're deciding whether you want to follow it or not. Yeah, knowing what's going on doesn't make it any less effective. You still are deciding whether you follow along to it or not. It just means that, for example, that's another thing with like indirect hypnosis, conversational hypnosis, use of the language patterns or whatever. When I hear it, even someone being very indirect or whatever, and they're trying to kind of do it as unnoticeable as possible, I know I'm either choosing to follow along to it or not, and I can notice what they're doing and I can admire the different ways they're presenting information. It doesn't make me suddenly not respond to it. Um, if anything, it means that I now understand what they want me to respond to in some situations where ordinarily I perhaps wouldn't have got what they're asking of me based on my understanding of kind of what they're doing. So I'm now near the bottom, so hopefully. Um, yeah, this series will also be joining the volume one in the playlist. I'll just do one Hypnotherapy Revealed playlist and then have everything in one place. Yeah, the idea is that most people think all grass looks the same. And so you really, really have to be getting down on your hands and knees, looking at individual blades of grass to notice the subtle nicks in one bit of grass that isn't in another bit of grass. And maybe there's a top of it missing, or maybe actually that one's slightly longer than that one. And so that's obviously another difference, that one's slightly longer than another. That one's a couple of millimeters wider than this one. That's a bit narrower. That's a bit deeper. That's a slightly more kind of V shaped and curved around perhaps, and so every single one will be different. And so the idea is you have to get, yeah, you want that client, so in that specific example you want that client to really be getting to that level of observing and working it out and then realizing how different everything really is. And the whole point, the whole reason why it works is, or a large part of the reason, is because of the fact the general assumption is, well, it's just a garden full of grass, it all looks the same, and they have to go looking to see that it's all different, and yet it doesn't detract from the beauty of the overall garden. um, you would, like I always say, you go there first. So if you want someone to be more confident, you'll sit up more confidently, you'll talk more confidently, you'll present yourself as, I am confident now. And so you're doing all these things, but you also, during conversation with the client, will pick up on when they do that. So you can ask them, as I've described before, things like, uh, so when you wake up in the morning, do you think that the ground is going to be beneath your feet? Well, yeah, of course I do. You've just gathered confidence out of them there and then, possibly a bit of arrogance and stuff as well, and maybe a bit of annoyance that you're asking them such a stupid question. But you've started to get that kind of, in the very most basic level, just doing that starts to get some confidence. So you can then elicit that, you can promote it a bit more, you can use a certain head movement perhaps when they say that. So you'll do things to acknowledge that that's kind of what you want. But you're going there first as well. It's no good you kind of say you're a hypnotherapist that think, oh, I don't really believe in myself, and so you're there kind of, so you want a bit more confidence. And I'll see what I can do to, I've not really had much success with it, but I'll see what I can do to help. That's not going to kind of portray confidence. Likewise, if you want someone to be laughing, you kind of, you need to be laughing a bit yourself while you're talking to them. You need to do something that elicits that within them. You need to be kind of going there first. um, I have done some videos doing hypnotic levitation online in the past, and things like hands moving together and pushing you backwards. Some of my earliest YouTube videos on this channel were things like having you stand in front of a seat and then I'll push you over through the screen, kind of thing, just as a sort of demonstration of what your mind can do. Well, my assumption is that most people know that helium balloons don't have the strength, really, not just one helium balloon, to lift an arm up. But the point is that it's a metaphor and it's using your imaginative brain in the same way that you know that the coyote running off the edge of a cliff wouldn't run off the edge of a cliff until they realize that they're off the edge of a cliff. Gravity doesn't suddenly kick in at the point when you realize that gravity is supposed to kick in. So you understand that logically, but you still kind of join in the experience, hopefully. So yeah, so it's so with the helium balloon thing, it's a case of I normally just add more and more helium balloons. I've not had any problem when I've done sessions via Skype or Zoom or any of those kind of services. It's gone exactly the same essentially as face to face. There are issues like you want to make there are safety issues. There are all sorts of issues that crop up. Confidentiality issues. There are issues around you've got to make sure that you know what you're going to do in relation to if their computer suddenly turns off because they never plugged it in, even if you've told them to, or they've plugged it in and not turned the socket on, even if you've told them to double check, or there's a power cut or something, or there's an internet service problem that cuts the service halfway through your session. So there's lots of things to consider, obviously, during something like an online session. And then there's the issue of sometimes what you're saying, there's a bit of a delay. So there are certain techniques or approaches that don't work quite as well. So I can't kind of see someone do a deep breath and say, that's it, just going even deeper. Because me saying that's it, just going even deeper might be heard about 3 or 4 seconds after they've actually done the breath I was commenting on, meaning that it means absolutely nothing to them in the context of where they're at that point. So those are the issues I've faced. I've never ever had a problem in relation to the actual therapy. And obviously, back prior to the days of Zoom and Skype, I was doing phone therapy with people where I'm on the phone, normally in a dark room and with my eyes shut, so that I can kind of really focus on all the information I can gather through the telephone call, like hearing their background, what background noise there is where they are, hearing what movement they're doing, hearing their breathing, hearing changes to their voice, hearing any kind of stuttering or hesitation in their voice, hearing if anyone else is in the room with them through the, really trying to build up as much of an image of what's going on for them as if I was sat in front of them, given that I'm not sat in front of them and I don't have any visual representation. So obviously therapists were frequently doing phone therapy prior to the likes of Zoom and Skype and all these things. And I remember working with somebody who was dying of cancer, and Stephen Brooks had referred her to me, and she was dying of cancer, and I heard her young child come running in and go, "Mummy, mummy, mummy," and then coming up, and her then having to send her child away. And obviously I'm trying to help her with pain and all sorts of other things over the phone, and the actual therapy part generally hadn't been a problem. It was just the technological issues of there are certain things that you can't necessarily do, or you have to work even harder at finding a way of doing. And so for me, back in the phone days, it was a case of I'm going to turn my lights out where I am in the room I'm in. So, like if I was doing it in here, I would turn these lights out, I'd close my eyes, and I'd have the phone up to my ear, and I would be listening as intently as I can down that phone and trying to have a sense of what's going on in their environment as if I was stood there or sat there with them doing therapy face to face, to try and use the sounds to build up the picture of what their environment's like. Um, if someone gets distracted by the window, I've not known it, but there's no reason why it couldn't happen. But if someone got distracted by the image of themselves, they don't have to look where the image is, or they don't have to look at the screen. Whatever, it's whatever works for them. If someone said to me, um, "Oh, I find seeing myself on the bottom of the screen really distracting, and I can't get rid of it," if I knew how to get rid of it, so if I was using the same, obviously I would be using the same service, but if I was using the service and thought, oh, I know how to get rid of it, then I would just tell them and they can get rid of it. Um, if not, then I would just suggest something like that they don't necessarily have to see me. They can talk as if we're on the phone. It's a bit more helpful me seeing them, and so they can just shrink the window completely, or just they can look the other way or sit sort of facing that way or something while I'm working with them. So yeah, or post-it notes or something. So it'd be looking for what solutions there could be. Um, you don't know what specifically they're not going to be focusing on anything specifically usually externally, but you know what they can hear or observe externally because you can hear and observe it as well. What you're doing though is trying to narrow their attention and direct their attention. So, for example, if I'm sat here, I can hear a slight buzz, probably from the computer. Um, I can hear a TV in the other room. I obviously can hear myself talking. I can hear music upstairs. So all of these things I can direct their attention to, and I know I'm narrowing their focus of attention and directing their attention externally from themselves to things that I know they can hear and I know that they are aware of, and they've not been focusing on it like I'm going to now focus on the bird outside. I'm now going to focus on the buzzing. They're not doing that. What you're doing though is directing their attention in a meaningful way to specific things so that you've captured their attention. You're now kind of keeping it focused, even though you're moving it around the sort of situation, before perhaps directing it inwardly. Yes, matches and helium aren't too much of a problem. The problem with the Hindenburg situation was that it was hydrogen. That's okay. Obviously, tomorrow I carry on with the fundamental principles and then move into priming. If you want to reorientate someone back to the room, that's one time. If you want someone to not be in their own thoughts so much, that's another time. So, say someone's more, um, I don't know, say someone's starting to get drawn into a worry or something, or drawn into something that's emotionally kind of, uh, like I told you before about the parent I worked with, where she really wanted to be able to say what she wanted to say about her issues with her son. And every previous therapist would say to her, "Oh, it sounds like it's been really difficult." It's so, and would kind of encourage her to cry. But once she started, suddenly, once she attached with that emotion, it overwhelmed her, and she never got finished what she wanted to say. So you would see her fighting back the emotion, not because she's trying to avoid the emotion for any kind of avoidance kind of reason, but because she's trying to focus on what she wants to say. And she gets frustrated with the fact that normally people then say, "Oh, it's okay to cry, it's okay to be upset," and they draw her straight into the thing that she doesn't want to be focused on, because she's trying to do something in this moment. Just like if you're, I don't know, say you're dealing with, say you work in retail, and someone comes in and they're incredibly aggressive and maybe on the verge of becoming violent. You don't want to get absorbed in the fact that you're absolutely terrified, because if you get absorbed on the fact you're terrified, you're probably going to make really bad decisions and not handle this situation well. You want to be focused externally on that person you're dealing with. As soon as the situation's over, you'll be shaking, your heart will be pounding away, you'll be hyperventilating, and you'll think that was absolutely terrifying. But you don't want that reaction while you're in the middle of the situation of, dealing with the situation. You want that reaction afterwards. The same, I assume, like if you're a parent and you saw your child in danger, the fact that it's your child is going to be absolutely terrifying, that something bad could be happening to your child. You want to be focused on saving them and protecting them and getting them to safety. You can cry your eyes out and shake and express how terrified you were once they're safe. That when you're trying to get them safe, if you just break down and cry and have get too emotional, you're not going to save them. You're not going to be there helping. And so it's the same kind of thing, that you might focus a client externally as a way, like I talked before about how what I did with this parent is I directed her attention to the TV, and I started talking about the situations that she was talking about and engaging in the conversation. But I started looking at the TV while she was talking about, while I was responding about it. And I started then indirectly, through my behavior, directing attention to that TV, so that we were both talking about this thing on the TV. We were no longer talking about this thing in her mind. So there's an example of where it's helpful to have an external focus. That was sort of for a therapeutic context, but it could be, for example, you're hypnotizing someone, so you know that they're aware of the world around them. So you start pacing the fact that that they're sat here, they're probably a bit uncomfortable, maybe never been hypnotized before. So you just tell them, you can be aware of sounds around you. You can be aware of the sound of the ticking clock. You can be aware of this, that, or the other. And you can be aware of, and then you start moving internally. You can be aware of the feeling of those arms on your hands resting on your lap or something. You can be aware of what those fingertips feel like on your legs. You can be aware of your breathing. So you start then going internal. But when you bring someone out of hypnosis, you can say, and as you begin to come back to the room, I don't know whether you'll first notice the sounds around you, whether it'll be the sound of my voice, whether it'll be the ticking clock, the cars outside. So you start reorientating them back to being back in the here and now. Whereas when they were going in, you reorientated them from the external world to the internal world. You don't necessarily think it means anything as such. You check. So as I mentioned, you end up testing to give yourself the best kind of guess. You take sort of a scientific approach to it. So you think, I've seen this specific movement in context with this specific whatever's going on. So we were talking about their work, and you notice a slight grimace or something on their face just for a split second. And so after talking about their work for a little while, you talk about the weather, you talk about other things. When you come back to talk about their work again, you notice that slight grimace again. That sort of, oh God, I don't want to have to talk about that again. And you notice that. And so you think, oh, right, that's twice in a row now, where when we talked about other things, you didn't do that behavior. When we came back to it, you did that behavior again, just like you did before. And so you might do that even a third time. You could change topic again and talk about other things. And then when you come back to the work topic, you see it a third time. So it's about recognizing the patterns. So it doesn't mean that you're correct. It just means that there's a significantly more, a greater likelihood that it probably is linked with what it is that it keeps showing up in. So all you're doing is having a best guess. You never are interpreting for the client. So you're never saying to a client, I think you've got a problem with your work because I see this reaction in you. Or I think you tell me you love your partner, but whenever we talk about your partner, you rub your neck. So you're not doing interpretive therapy. You're not interpreting it for the client. You're just looking for patterns, checking the pattern out to see if it fits, and using that to help inform how you're working with them. And if it turns out it's wrong, if you start if you decide I'm going to take a line of questioning by now asking more about work and see if work is part of this presenting problem that they're here with. So they say they're presenting with stress. They want to learn to relax because they're struggling with stress, and you ask them, so how do you know you're stressed? What is it that's causing that kind of problem? And they say, well, my life's pretty good. I don't think anything causes me stress. I just am stressed all the time. And so you're trying to get information out of them. And so now you're obviously digging and saying, well, what's it like at work? What's it like in this situation? What's it like? And you notice this pattern of whenever we touch on work, they grimace. You can then check out a little bit, a bit later, you check out, right, a little bit more deeper. So just tell me a bit more. What is it you do for a living? What's your job? What's this, that, and the other? And you start now going into it a bit deeper. It could be that when they tell you everything, there's nothing that comes out that makes you think there's anything you can work with there that gives anything away. It doesn't mean there isn't a problem related to work. It also doesn't mean there is a problem. It just means that you gathered information that led you in a direction. It didn't go anywhere, and you carry on with your session. And it could be in a future session that something comes out, as happens often, that something in a future session comes out where it's like, so it was actually a work related thing. It's just that they didn't want to say the specific issue around work, and so they kept it from you when you challenged them directly. And then it comes out sort of a bit later when they've perhaps gained confidence and trust in you and feel more comfortable with that relationship. So it's not that you're ever 100% certain. It's not that it ever means necessarily what you think it means. It's just, I saw a pattern, and this was what that pattern has this is where that pattern was. This is what that pattern seems to be teaching me. It doesn't surprise me that your dog would struggle if you're wearing a mask and covering your face. Yeah, that was my logic, is that a lot of the work I've done has been in people's own homes where there's in their lounge normally, and there's a TV over somewhere in that lounge, and they're so conditioned anyway to look at the TV when people are looking at the TV, that it's not unnatural for them to look at the TV when you just direct their attention over towards it as you talk. And you can do it kind of a bit more covertly in terms of you're just doing it like, so what is it that we would see? And you just look over at the TV. Or you can do it a bit more obvious and just say, well, if we were to watch this on the TV, then what would we see? And you just openly say it. And then every time you answer and respond and engage in conversation, you look at the TV as if you're saying, I believe what I've just said here. I believe that we're talking about what's on TV. So you act congruent with that. And generally, the behavior that someone is doing non-consciously is normally the honest behavior. So sometimes it's okay. So going straight back to the work stress example I just gave, um, it it's often that that grimace probably was something, you don't know what, but was a sign that there was some issue there. Um, and then that ends up being, it's then a case of them lying to themselves, even kind of thinking, no, everything's fine, I'm great at handling things, there's no problem. And they're kind of consciously, perhaps even, um, conning themselves almost, and not realizing how big an issue something is for them. um, um, no, not really. If it depends how often I get involved. So this is obviously in relation to the last question. I think I read something else a minute ago, but in relation to the last question, does it annoy me when there's lots of different conversations going on in the chat section? Um, if there is, um, if it's just all stuff that I'm not likely to respond to, then all I end up, and I've obviously talked about this a few times on different streams, that then it ends up feeling like, well, there's not really much point me being here, because you're just going to end up with, and I said this yesterday as well, it just ends up with me staring at the screen, not doing anything, because there's nothing for me to, um, answer or respond to. So if there's chats going on, but there's enough people in the chat that it means that I still see comments coming up that are things I, can be involved in or answer or whatever, um, then that's obviously, not really, bothering me. Um, because I want everyone to get on. That's something I quite like about, those of you who've been around for ages know this. Um, but something I quite like is knowing that there's a bunch of you that when you're in the live chat, it's like, oh, hello, you're here again. That's good to know. How have you been getting on? And then you talk about different things, and obviously in the broader sense. So obviously this week I'm reading from my Ericksonian Approach book, but in the broader sense, I want these kind of streams to be a way of people having some kind of interaction, if they want it, with the outside world. Those who just literally want to watch me talk can do that, but those who want to have a bit of interaction with people can know, oh, at 7:30 I get to interact with, you know Ellen. I get to interact with introverted Fox. I get to interact with Holly, whatever it happens to be. You kind of just know people can then have that, oh, I like interacting with them, and so I'm going to interact with them. Um, so it only annoys me either if I'm doing my story creation session and I'm starting to read my story, and then lots of comments are coming up that are kind of, um, I don't know, if it's just general chat, it's not too bad. But if it's too much coming up, then I end up having to just look away, because or else I end up seeing random words and things, and it scrambles my brain, and I can't get my words out because of it. I have enough problems with, finding the right words at the best of times. Um, but when it's like this, it's not too much of an issue. Obviously, I like some questions to be asked that stimulate me to be involved in the live chat in some way. And if I've just read something, then it's nice if some of it's about what I've just read, as in is the case for this one. But I'm not that worried, um, what it is. Yeah. So you can do a behavior, and sometimes you know that you know what it was about or whatever. But at the same time, a therapist could suspect that the swallowing was directly linked to specific types of issues, but at the same time can't jump to that conclusion even if they strongly suspect that, and they shouldn't tell you, I think it's this, um, because it is just a therapist's opinion. And if you go to 6 different therapists, they will all give you 6 different opinions. Um, and how do you know that any of them are right or wrong? And you'll have your own opinions as well, and there's no guarantee they're right or wrong either. Um, um, well, you would just have to kind of look for the pattern with that person. You get people who are conning themselves, and normally it's that they seem to be believing what they've said. So you notice a pattern that says one thing of, say, non-conscious behaviors, but then when they say the conscious kind of thing, what they're saying to you, perhaps, it can come across so sincere, like they genuinely believe what they're saying. So I know someone who would tell me how I used to hate playing games with him because I didn't like that he was better than me. And I know that's 100% not true, but I know that he 100% believes that. And I know that I'm not the only one who didn't like playing games with him. And I know that the others who didn't like playing games with him didn't like playing games with him for exactly the same reason as me. But I know he 100% believes that he's virtually a saint, and that it was, yeah, if you ever say, no, it's because you're a poor loser, and if we ever beat you, you would smash everything up, you'd throw everything around the room, you'd lose your temper and get ridiculously angry. That's why we didn't want to play games with you. That's what myself and the others I know is the reason why we didn't like playing games with this person. But their perspective is, I'm the calmest, most placid person. I've always been the calmest, most placid person. And you lot just didn't want to play games with me because you knew that I was so much better than you at everything, and you hated losing. And that person genuinely 100% comes across as they believe that. They've convinced themselves that that reality is the reality. So what you would do is look for, is there kind of a difference, a mismatch that seems to be where they are believing what they say, or is it a mismatch where it looks a bit deceptive? Like there's a mismatch, but when you start talking about things, perhaps the mismatch is that part of it is that they either make excessive eye contact with you while saying something as well, as if to kind of say, I'm telling the truth here, even though you can see a different kind of, like, maybe they normally aren't making much eye contact, they're just making normal eye contact, and then they kind of go, no, I tell you, I really don't have any issue with my husband, and they rub their neck, and they do that multiple times, and you notice that the mismatch is directed at you rather than within themselves, rather than it being I genuinely believe this and I'm mismatching. It's, I am trying to pull over the wool over your eyes and I'm mismatching. It's that kind of thing. It's just trying to look for, and obviously there's never a guarantee that you're right, but it's just trying to look for the patterns. Yes, they end up on Britain's Got No Talent. They would definitely blame the judge and the audience, and it would somehow be the judge's fault, the audience's fault, not theirs. Um, well, I'm not a fan of pretty much all of the current. There are paid video conferencing services that you can get that are very secure. Um, but even then, I'm not generally. I think it's something currently to use as the last resort, or only with people who you know in your area. So there becomes lots of issues to deal with once you get to doing distance hypnotherapy or distance any therapy. um, around safeguarding, safety, confidentiality, all these different areas. And then you end up, if you have cross-border laws, because you're, say, for example, doing hypnotherapy with someone in another country, it just starts getting very messy. Whereas if it's like, I live in West Sussex in the UK, and if I started seeing clients in West Sussex via video services, then I would think that's far more acceptable rather than me seeing clients in, say, America. Um, America is obviously a very confusing place because of every state doing things differently. Um, but yeah, so if it's with people locally to you, like for example, I live in West Sussex, and so I do video sessions with people in West Sussex, and I know their home address. Obviously, I've got their doctor's details. I'm keeping their doctor informed that, and it's easier for me to keep their doctor informed because their doctor isn't in another country. I'm keeping their doctor informed that I'm working with them, etc. And I know how safeguarding uh, principles work over here. I know what to do if I suspect that there's, say, a domestic abuse situation happening. I know what to do if there is, say, a risk, in my opinion, like child protection risk or any other kind of risk in their address. I know what to do if I felt that there was a risk of them, say, harming themselves or others. I know that I can, for example, get emergency services to them. I still have to try. I have to kind of. They would give me their address, and they would have to give me authorization that it's okay for me to contact their doctor. And then, as part of contacting the doctor, I would, give talk to the doctor, and then we would confirm that the address is correct, etc. So you can corroborate that kind of detail, because the other one is that if someone, say, lived in another country, I can't necessarily contact the doctor. I can't necessarily then corroborate the address details of the person. So they could have lied to me about their address. I'm then doing therapy with them. They then end up in a situation somehow that's high risk for them. And because that it's high risk for them, I want to get emergency services to them, whether it's them telling me in a call or something that they're about to harm themselves, or whether it's that they suddenly mention about the fact that their husband or wife or whatever is abusive and is monitoring them currently, or whatever it happens to be, and they feel at risk and they need help. There's not a lot I can do easily from another country. So making sure, so it's just trying to sort of think through all those things that I think are more important necessarily than the specific service that you use. Zoom has recently gone through a bit of a bad patch in terms of its reputation for security. There are, as I say, paid services you can use that are more secure. But you've then also got the fact that you can't guarantee they're not recording the session. You may or may not be recording the session. And obviously, if you are, you can obviously get their permission if that's what you want to do. You can get their permission that you're going to record them for, your records, and for it could be for a mix of reasons. It could be for your learning, for your stuff that will only then go between you and your clinical supervisor. Obviously, I recommend everyone, any therapist obviously, has a clinical supervisor and sees them regularly to talk about cases and talk through cases and challenges you're facing, and what have you. Yes, I think that is uh, probably a challenge nowadays with people who are doing therapy. And obviously, because of the current situation, there has been a lot of people raising the issue of needing to carry on working, and people being more in need of the therapy that they would be missing if they had to go to a place and can't now go to that place. Um, But again, as I say, that's not quite as much of an issue if, for example, you normally work with this client in a therapy center, and perhaps you normally already have their doctor's details, and so you can just check, you can confirm their address and what have you, and then you already know them, you know a bit about them because you've been doing one-to-one therapy perhaps in a center or wherever with them anyway, maybe even doing therapy at their home, and so you're in a better position to then just transfer some of those sessions online for now, while we're in the current situation. um, but yeah, there's so much to end up considering. There's stuff to consider if you go and see clients or if you do client therapy in a center or something, but there's just different stuff to consider. And my view is it's harder generally to address the risks that you identify when it's via distance services. Swap my drinks around. Coffee up there. Now move on to the water. And tomorrow we move on to utilization and goal setting, and then on to the next chapters. Still waiting for a copy of the third volume in the Hypnotherapy Revealed series to arrive. The third volume is 25 pages shorter than volume 1 and 2 put together. So it's 25 pages shorter than that. I don't know, as soon as possible. Hopefully the 18th. I think that's the nearest day. The shirt is also, it says dispatched and is due to arrive at any point. But the last few days there's been no post. I don't mean the last few days as in just at the weekend on the Sunday or anything, or the Friday when it was obviously a bank holiday. But yeah, the last few days there's not been any post here. Yes, it will look the same size on Kindle. It'll be as large as your Kindle. Yeah, it's the third book in the series, the transcripts book, hypnotherapy transcripts. Taken me a very long time to complete it. It shouldn't have done. It should have been quick and easy, but it took me a long time to complete it. But then I often look at something and think, right, let's get that done by the end of the week, and then realize that there's not enough hours in a week to do what I wanted to do by the end of the week. So I obviously have done a light announcement across social media and everything. Um, is what an actual term? I've no idea what words have come out of my mouth. Yeah, they are transcripts. It is reasonably common to have hypnotherapy transcripts um, as the names of different books that are full of hypnosis scripts. Um, and they are technically like transcripts, except they're not transcripts, they're transcripts, and they're not necessarily transcripts. just to confuse things. I do have a book which will be coming out. I think it's volume 7 or something, maybe 8. I'm just having a look. Yeah, volume 7 will be hypnotherapy transcripts, which are transcripts rather than transcripts. And I have done that on purpose, just to create confusion. But yeah, I have done that on purpose. Yeah, I won't read volume 3 because it doesn't really make much sense to read it. Yeah, sitting down reading transcripts of transcripts. Trying to work out which transcript was the right transcript to figure out how to work with this person and whether this transcript is the right transcript or that transcript is the right transcript. Because you don't want to read the wrong transcript because that transcript won't work as well as the right transcript. 4, I think, is about therapy. Therapeutic transformation is volume 4. And it depends on time. I find, obviously, I'm not going to do anything while in the lockdown because I don't have time because I'm doing these during the lockdown. And this takes a lot of my time up. YouTube itself takes a lot of my time up. So you want to now know 5 to 10. Well, I've told you 7. 5, working with couples and families. 6, ideodynamic healing, which is probably my favorite one. 7, hypnotherapy transcripts. Transcripts as in, transcribed scripts, transcribed sessions. 8, making a living. So that's talking about the actual role of becoming a hypnotherapist and different ways you can make a living as a hypnotherapist and things to consider and all that sort of jazz. 9, the dark side of hypnosis. I have a sense that that'll be an interesting one to write. 10, parapsychological hypnosis, which I also feel will be an interesting one to write. That's technically a real thing that happened as well. There's the famous, there's a hypnotherapist who I can't remember. I can never remember his name. I've got the newspaper the newspaper somewhere that talked about him and some of his exploits, but I've also got the documentary about it. There was a hypnotherapist who, at going back, say, 10 years, was the highest paid hypnotherapist in the world. And he was virtually unknown. But one thing he did was he hypnotized, back in the late 90s, I think it was, he hypnotized a boxer to see red and to feel no pain and to just focus on causing a lot of harm and to not go down under any circumstances. And that boxer then got in the ring with Chris Eubank. Chris Eubank couldn't make him go down, and he just kept pummeling and attacking Chris Eubank until Chris Eubank lost. And Chris Eubank then called for hypnosis to be banned from being used in relation to sports, saying it gives people an unfair advantage because the reason he couldn't knock the guy down was because the hypnotist had told him, it doesn't matter what Chris Eubank does to you, you will not be able to go down. You will not fail in this fight. You will just keep going for him and going for him and going for him and going for him. You won't feel any pain. you'll just, like a wild animal, you'll just want to get him, kind of take him out. And so yeah, so that's I've got the documentary of that somewhere on a hard drive. Um, it's on YouTube, I think, somewhere. Um, yeah, I don't think he'd realised until he. I don't think he believed that it's one of those situations where people just think, "Oh no, hypnosis can't really work. It's kind of rubbish stuff." And I think his attitude was, "There's no way that this could work," and he didn't believe in hypnosis or anything until he was in the ring. And obviously, you can't then say, "Hang on a minute, I've just realised this hypnosis thing seems to make someone into someone who can't be knocked down. Is it okay if we just pause the fight a moment while I ring up a hypnotherapist and get them to quickly, zap me, and then I'll come back in the ring?" Um, so I think it was just too late. By the time he realised that actually this did have a big impact on this guy's ability to fight, um, it was too late. Yeah, his attitude was exactly that. Don't want to say those words. Don't want another demonetized video, and that would probably get it demonetized. So yeah, in relation to my favorite way I've seen hypnosis depicted in um, movies, I don't know. Normally, it's ridiculously badly done, and yeah, always keep a hypnotist in your corner. Um, Normally, movies do a really bad job of it. I was really disappointed with is it Trance, the Danny Boyle film? That given that I think Danny Boyle had consulted Darren Brown, I imagined it was going to be really well done, and it was pretty rubbish. Um, so obviously, I bought the film because it's got hypnosis in it, but yeah, that wasn't very good. Um, I'm trying to think. There's not many that I think I've seen it done kind of good in any way. Normally, it's so there are times that I like films that have hypnosis in them at times. It's just that you just sort of take it with a pinch of salt how it's just been delivered. Like when you watch films relating to Svengali, you watch kind of Trilby type films, and it's largely waving your fingers at someone and staring at someone, and the person's suddenly hypnotized. Um, Obviously, all the vampire sort of Dracula type films do the same kind of thing. The person just looks in a certain way, and people just suddenly become hypnotized. And so I like those films, but I wouldn't obviously take any of the hypnosis remotely kind of seriously. Then there's things like the Manchurian Candidate, and I don't know if I've seen Get Out. I might have done, but I don't think I have. Yeah, then there's things like the Manchurian Candidate, which kind of glosses over. I can't remember. I haven't seen the old one for a long time, and I haven't seen the new one since it came out, and I bought it on DVD and watched it. But most things don't go into the hypnosis that much. They kind of gloss over it and just show a little bit of suggestions happening, and then move on as if been there, done that. You get the idea. The person's hypnotized. Let's move on. I quite liked how the hypnosis was done in The Mentalist, the TV series. I thought that was done very well, generally. And when the mentalist character, would do the subtle kind of hypnotic stuff, like tapping on a table, or shaking someone's hand to hypnotize them, or stroking their hand, or anything like that. It sounds like something I'll have to find and watch. I normally, if I ever hear of a book or a movie or a TV series that involves hypnosis, then whether it's going to be good or rubbish, I always buy it and add it to my collection. And will normally watch it and check it out and see if it's any good. Um, and that's why, obviously, I've talked before about a lot of my hypnosis novels that I've got dating back from the 1800s through to nowadays. Um, some more interesting than others. So yeah, so I don't mind hypnosis in novels, but um, it's normally just to get the story rolling in some way. Is what I find. It's normally just like for example, there is other places hypnosis is used, which is technically a bit more accurate to how people use it. I can't remember the name of the movie off the top of my head, but there's like the movie where it's about I think it's a couple who believe they've been abducted by aliens, and they go through the movie's kind of based around them having their hypnosis sessions around these alien abductions, and then doing the flashbacks to what their alien abduction experience was. And it's like someone's listening on the cassette tapes of the hypnosis sessions. Um, so that's the hypnosis. When you hear the sort of talking of the hypnotist, is kind of what you would expect from a typical hypnotist over most of the years, of just close your eyes and I'm going to just talk to you, and then they just do quite direct hypnosis. um but it is normally just a way of getting into the story, and then hypnosis is almost forgotten about um in my free time. So in all of that free time that I have, I'll start another. I did start doing something similar to that years and years ago when I was trying to think, oh, what do I do a blog on? And so I started, obviously, and the same on my channel. I started trying to review different things, including books and things. So I thought something I could do is review books and things. 'Cause I've got a couple of books, so I've got more books than weeks that I'm likely to be alive. So I could do that for as long as I'm doing YouTube and never run out of books, because I'm always going to be buying even more. Um, but it just kind of fizzled out because no one ever really pays attention to them. And on the blog, obviously, no one ever read them. Um, just seeing if there's anything else I missed up here. Yeah, so I see part of my kind of role, online role, as trying to help to break up misconceptions and things, and try and put hypnosis into some kind of more realistic setting. Because one thing that irritates me is both sides of the argument. The hypnosis doesn't exist; it's not real. Um, it just doesn't work kind of argument because it's not real. That irritates me because I think literally scientists, you'd have no problem finding scientists who work in the field of psychology, medicine, things like that. They're going to agree hypnosis exists. Hypnosis is a thing. They won't agree necessarily over how it actually works and things like that, but they'll agree that it's a thing and have no problem with it. It's a bit like someone saying, I don't believe in um I don't know, that people have perceptions, or that people feel love, or whatever. It's an odd thing to not believe. But there are obviously a lot of lay people who see this thing called hypnosis on films and that makes them then think there's no way that could be real. But then the opposite that I don't like is the hypnotists who, I was going to say gravity, and then I thought some smart ass will probably comment on the fact that gravity is a fundamental law of nature, and hypnosis obviously isn't a fundamental law of nature. So I chose not to use gravity as my example, but it was the one I was thinking of. Um, yeah, so the other side is where people oversell hypnosis and kind of try and portray hypnosis as this wonder cure that you just instantly jump into someone's head and click your fingers, say you're healed, and their problem vanishes. And then when you try and say to, when I try and say to fellow hypnotists, um, that's not the case, they'll say, well, it is the case. If someone comes to see me and they want to quit smoking, I tell them, you don't smoke anymore, and they don't smoke anymore. And if they do, there was a problem with them. And you can try and say, but actually the scientific research doesn't show it as being anywhere near as effective as that. Just trying to suggest away problems. Um, they don't buy into it because so your own fellow hypnotists don't necessarily buy into it because they want it to be this all powerful thing. The same with neurolinguistic programming. I'll meet neurolinguistic programming practitioners who will sort of oversell how incredible it is and how it works with literally anything you could imagine, and that the 7 days they went on to train and learn how to do it have transformed their life because now they can literally heal anyone of anything virtually. And that's not what actual science kind of points to when you do a study under scientific conditions. Um, and so I always try and get it in that middle line of, it is not rubbish. It's not something that doesn't exist. It's not something that is, you know, evil, demonic, letting the devil into you, all these things that you get at one end of the spectrum. But it's also not the other end of the spectrum where it's absolutely perfect and that literally you can just tell anyone anything and they'll just get better regardless. And I always point out, if it worked that well, it would be a doctor's first choice. When you go to a doctor's surgery and say, I want to quit smoking, what can I do? The doctor would just, in the sort of 20 minutes maybe that they don't normally have that long, but say they had 20 minutes with you, they would just say, I'll quickly hypnotize you. I'll tell you you don't have your problem anymore and you can go on your way perfectly fine. Or you go to the doctor and say, I've got anxiety. They would say, okay, give me 20 minutes just to quickly hypnotize you, tell you that you don't, and you can leave here without it. If it worked as well as that, how some hypnotists try and portray it as working, then that would be what doctors would do. The reality is it doesn't work anywhere near like that. And it's because it doesn't work anywhere near like that, and hypnotists then oversell it and pretend that it does, that when people then see a hypnotist and they don't get these results instantly, because I even tell people, you'll probably, if we don't see progress in 3 to 6 sessions, then we'd have to review whether I'm the right therapist for you and whether things are working. And they'll say, but you do hypnosis. Can't you just, hypnotize me when I pop in on like Wednesday and get rid of my problem for me? No, it doesn't work like that. Well, can you send me to one of the hypnotists that does do it like that? No, no. Anyone that tells you it works like that is lying to you. So I encounter people who have bought into this idea of it being this miracle cure, including other hypnotherapists who claim that. And so it's trying to get that balance of, it has its place, but it's not this panacea that cures everything. It's not a therapy. It's just about focusing attention. And the therapy comes down to what the therapist knows how to do as therapy, and what their skills are and knowledge is. Learning hypnosis you can do easily within 30 minutes to an hour. You can learn and practice hypnosis and be comfortable with doing it. That doesn't mean you can now go curing everyone of everything. It just means now you know how to guide someone's attention on one thing. Yeah, in a sense, it's a bit like the way that I think some people, when they find out how a magic trick is done, um, they don't want to believe that that's how it was done. They don't want to believe. So take someone like Darren Brown. So that I'm talking about magic that can seem quite mystical at times. And he maybe has someone come up on stage and he tells them what seems like really personal stuff about that person that he shouldn't know. And he points out to them, I am doing a trick. That's all I'm doing. I'm not mystical. I'm not I'm not a mind reader. I'm not clairvoyant. I'm none of these sort of things. And so he's telling you that isn't, I'm not doing anything magical here. It just literally is a trick. And then he tells you kind of personal stuff. Some people, when you tell them, I'm not magical, I'm not mystical or whatever, it's just a trick, they still say, but I know he really is, because there's no way he could know that. Um, or even if you tell the person, here is how it is done, they say, yeah, that's how most people do it. But clearly it was so accurate that this time round it was real. I think he's just hiding the fact that he's really psychic. And they just don't want to buy into the fact that the reality is it's quite a simple thing. So it's trying to get that balance. I think the same with hypnosis, that some people, they don't want it to be, they don't want to lift the veil and see it as you know really it's quite a simple trick behind the scenes. All we're doing is helping you to pay attention to something so that you do a better job of what you pay attention to, and you have less distractions. um People just think, no, it can't be that it can't be that easy, it can't be that can't be what you're doing. um Talking about escapology now. Yeah, so people do end up hearing it's a bit like the two girls that back in the 1800s started the whole spirits knocking thing during seances. They ended up coming out and saying, we faked it. We faked it. We were able to, one of them was able to click their toe joints enough to make the knocking, the sort of rapping sounds. And so they said they faked it. And the public said, no, we don't believe you. We believe it was real. So even though they were saying they faked it, that it all happened and they faked it, people still just said, no, don't believe you. And so even the people themselves, who were doing it, coming out and saying something, weren't believed. That is how they did it. They were able to click their toes. A bit like clicking your knuckles, but with your toes somehow without having to use your other hand. But I do think there's two types of people: those who, when you have the curtain, the veil, revealing what's behind the scenes, think, wow, that's how it works, even if it actually is really simple. So say it's a magic trick where you make something disappear from one place and appear somewhere, or appear somewhere else or whatever. When you find out how it's done, some people think, wow, that's cool. I Wow, that's cool. I now know how it's done, and it's incredible that you managed to pull off something so simple under my nose without me noticing it. Other people think, oh, you've ruined it for me now. I didn't want to know how it was done. So you end up, you know, um, with different people having different reactions. I'm one of those who, when I find out how something's done, that makes it more impressive for me that someone was able to do that in front of you, especially when it's something really simple. Um, or when it turns out there's a really, because I like the idea of simplicity underlying complexity, and the idea that frequently, so not always, but frequently, that's what it is, that there's some simple rules or there's some simple process that is just hidden behind what looks difficult, or complex. And for example, with a lot of magic, my magic uncle, he used to do a trick where he knew nearly every time he went to a dinner party, people would want to say, go on, do a trick for us. So one of his favorite tricks to do at dinner parties was that as he arrives at someone's house, he would head to their bookshelves. He would find a book on their bookshelves. He would flick through to a random page in that book. He would find a random word on that page. He would then make note of what that word is and where that word is, what page number, what book it's in, how far down it is, how far along it is, etc. He'd make a note of all that and have that written down. And then at some random point during the evening, so he's done that pretty much on arrival. No one's paid attention to him. He's just being bought, someone brings him a drink or something. No one pays attention to him. A couple of hours later, someone says, "Go on, do some magic for us. Go on, do some magic trick." And he'll then end up encouraging them to pick a random book off of the shelf. And he'll sort of influence them to pick this one book off of the shelf that he knows the word in. He would then randomly get them to pick a page, and it would be the page he's forcing them kind of to get. And then he'd randomly get them to pick a line on that page, and it's going to be the line that he encourages them to pick. And then he's going to randomly get them to pick a word on that line, and it will be the word that he then encourages them to pick. And then he'll end up revealing what that word is. He'll say, "I'll write down a word," and he'll then reveal what that word is. And they'll think, "Oh my God, out of literally," and he would sell it as this way as well. You've got 150 books on that bookshelf. I reckon that each book has an average of 400 pages. And so that's this many thousands of pages that are on that shelf. And you chose this book through your own free will. I've never been to your house before. I've never been here, never had anything to do with this ever before. And you chose that book. That was a perfectly free choice. And out of that book, out of all these thousands of pages on your bookshelf, you selected that page. You selected that line. You selected, I know, lightweight. You selected that number of words in on that line. What was your word? And then they read off the word, and then he'll turn around his sheet of paper, and it will be the same word. And then they'll be thinking, "Oh my God, how did he know? He's never been to my house before. How did he know that?" And he would have set it up beforehand. And obviously, when he then tells you, "Well, when I first arrive, I know someone's going to say you're a magician, do some magic. I just nip over to the bookshelf, pick a book, find a word, and then just get them to find that word during the trick, and it looks magic." And that's a really simple solution. But then there's the artistry of how he managed to conversationally encourage them to that word. And so even though it's really simple, you notice the talent in it, and the sort of skill in covertly being able to just appear natural when you're in the person's house, and have no one pay attention to the fact you picked a book off their shelf. No one pay attention to the fact that you flicked to a page, that you then noted down in your mind a word, and then you later wrote that word down knowing how to get to that word. And then you just put the book back on the shelf, and no one pays attention to 2 hours earlier you did all that. And then no one really notices that you're directing the person around the bookshelf by saying things like, I don't know, you could say like, "So I just want you to think of, what would you rather think of, top or the bottom?" And people say, "I don't know, top." Okay, so if you got rid of all the top books, you're just left with the bottom books. So left or right? Yeah, so left. Okay, so you get rid of all the left books. You've got the ones that are on the right and that bottom corner, and then one. Say there's 3 shelves. 1, 2, or 3. 1. Okay, so you keep the first shelf, because that happens to be the shelf that it's on. You keep that first shelf. So out of those, and then you just use these kind of ways of, whatever answer they give, the way you were wording things is vague enough that whatever they give is what you change what you're going to do next based on the answer they gave you. And you end up, it's a bit like the magic trick of you sort of say reds or blacks, and then someone says reds. You go, "Okay, get rid of the reds." And out of those blacks, you've got the number cards and the picture cards. Name one. Number cards. Okay, so we'll get rid of the number cards. You're left with the picture cards, and you've got a king, queen, and jack. So just sort of name a pair of them. King and queen. Okay, so you're just left with that jack. Sort of 2 jacks, so 2 black jacks. Spades or clubs? Clubs. Okay, so we'll get rid of the jack of clubs. You're left with the jack of spades. And then you reveal the jack of spades and think, "Oh, wow, how on earth did you manage to guess the jack of spades?" And, you just narrowed it down to that. It doesn't matter what they said. If you said, reds or blacks, okay, so we keep the black cards, and then you spread them out. So number cards or picture cards? Picture cards. Okay, so we'll keep the picture cards. Just sort of think of a pair of them. Okay, Jack and Queen. Okay, so we'll keep the Jacks and Queens, and I don't know, male or female. Male. Okay, so we'll keep the Jacks, and so it doesn't matter what their answer is. You just kind of go with it. You're only going to do the trick once. They don't really pay that much attention. You just go with it, and then they always end up with what you want them to end up with, however they do it. Yeah, so the choice is always yours, but the person thinks that they chose. They remember, well, I chose this, and I chose that, and I chose this, and I chose that, but actually they named this and they named that. You either kept or got rid of it based on your prior knowledge of where you're going with the trick. So it's a similar kind of thing that you're doing with the books. And as long as you don't do the same trick to someone over and over again, they don't really notice that you've done that. They don't really notice that you were selected. They just think, they have this sense that, I just was randomly selecting things, and somehow it ended up on the card that he had in an envelope or in his back pocket, or somehow it ended up on the card that I had in my back pocket, and I don't know how it could have happened. Yeah, we do have Guess Who, or Guess Whom, as Darren Brown calls it. Yes, you just lead them to your answer step by step. Whatever they say, you know what. So you know up front, I want them to get to the Jack of Spades. I know I want them to get to the Jack of Spades. So whatever answer they give has to get to that Jack of Spades. So if you sort of say reds and blacks, pick one. Whatever they pick, you're either going to keep it or not keep it, depending on whether it's what you want to keep, depending on whether your card that you want them to get to is in that set. As you just work your way through it. And obviously you do the same with hypnosis. I wonder how that arm's feeling. It's beginning to feel heavy. Yes, it's really beginning to feel heavy. It's feeling heavy. I'll just tell you it's feeling heavy. That's what you've just told me. And they start to get this idea of the fact that they think you're the one doing it. So, how does that arm feel now? Oh, the arm feels quite heavy. That arm feels quite heavy. That's right. And I wonder whether there's anything else you notice about it. Is there any movement? Not yet. It feels quite still at the moment. That's right. It really does feel really still. There's really no movement in that arm. And as you notice it's got no movement, I wonder how deep you'll go into hypnosis. Just keep looking at that hand and just notice what happens next. Do you notice any warmth or coolness? There's some coolness. And as you notice that coolness, so whatever answer they give you, well, that's the correct answer for your experience here and now, because that is the experience you're having here and now. So it must be the correct answer. All you're doing is linking it towards the end result that you want. So, every choice essentially is you're deciding the direction, but the person feels like they're making all the choices, which is essentially the kind of way you work Ericksonian, that the person is making all their own choices and doing all their own behaviors and things, but you're observing all these and then you're utilizing whatever happens in the direction of the goal. And that's why I think it's obviously very important to approach everything with a sense of curiosity. Because if you're curious about how you're going to achieve that success, pretty much nothing else really matters. What someone says or does is fine. It's all kind of us. That's how you're doing your journey to success. Whether that's doing it like the magic trick, what's your journey going to be to that Jack of Spades? And then you're just curious about that. You just offer choices to get towards it, to give them a chance to be focusing on things in the direction of the Jack of Spades. Or, what's your journey to quitting smoking? You're just curious about that, and then you're just, giving them options and giving them things to focus on in in the direction of um, quitting smoking. Yeah, curiosity, I think, is a very important trait in people. And a non-curious therapist is probably not a particularly good therapist. The chances are they don't do much observation, they don't do much observing, they do more dictating than observing. Yeah, so you're just kind of linking everything towards the success that you're trying to achieve. I've told the story before about the smoker who said, "Is it okay if my husband comes along with me because I've never been hypnotized before, so it's scary. I don't know, you might knock me out somehow and could do anything to me, and that's terrifying. So can my husband come along?" I said, "Well, of course he can. That's fine." So he came along to the session, and at the end of the session, the husband said, "Wow, she's never been hypnotized before, but she got everything right. That's so impressive that she just seemed to naturally know how to be hypnotized, naturally know how to go through the process to quit smoking." And she did quit smoking. And in my head, I was thinking, no, she didn't. Nearly everything I would have liked her to do, she did the opposite, or she did something completely different. It's just that I used whatever she did as being the correct thing for her. So she didn't do the things I had thought that would be nice for her to do. Yeah, I do say I wonder quite a lot. Um, because part of it is then you are just expressing curiosity. So you're giving options, but you're expressing curiosity. um, and so you're letting the person decide. You're not being threatening. So you're not kind of saying, you know, you will do this in this way or that way or whatever. You're kind of thinking, I don't know how you're going to do this, so I wonder how you're going to do it. I'm curious. I wonder whether you'll do it this way or that way. I wonder whether you'll um, go deeper to the sound of my voice or the spaces between my words. I don't know how you're going to go deeper. I just have faith that you will. No, sorry. Maybe I'll yawn a bit more tomorrow night. That'd be annoying. That you have a way that works well for you, and a hypnotherapist thinks, no, we don't like people doing things their way. You do things my way. Yeah, I couldn't care less whether someone has their eyes open, eyes closed. When I get people who say, I tried to hypnotize someone, but they didn't want to close their eyes, so it didn't work. Well, their eyes being closed or open is irrelevant. Are you focusing their attention on something? Are they following your focus of attention? Well, yawns sell book if it's supposed to send you to sleep, I'm sure. So obviously tomorrow we get into some of the hypnotic language patterns, which include linking suggestions. I don't know if that's tomorrow. I can't remember. It is in. I was just saying it's in the thumbnail, but it's not in the thumbnail. That I haven't posted the thumbnail yet. It's in the thumbnail I made today, and I can't see that right now. Yeah, really, you want to treat clients as it doesn't matter what you do. If you're in therapy and you want to be in therapy, then it's kind of accepting how they present in therapy and doing things the client's way. What, yawning while talking about murder? I have said before about doing the whole, like on training courses, doing the whole. Uh, you can find the handouts over by the books at the back of the hall, and then I would tell people to buy the books at the back of the hall. Obviously, that kind of thing is very handy for anyone who does presentations or talks where you want people to buy a product of yours at the same time. If there's something that you want people, if there's like tea and coffee, or if there is biscuits or sweets, or if there's handouts or anything, put them next to the books that you're trying to sell, or CDs or whatever product you're trying to sell, so that you then, when you're on stage talking to everyone, have an opportunity to say, you can find teas and coffees over by the books at the back of the hall, and you can then tell people to go and buy the books, or you can find the teas and coffees over by the CDs at the back of the hall, or whatever it happens to be. So you just have that excuse to be able to uh, give a suggestion to go and buy your stuff. If you do ever give presentations, definitely make sure you got a card reader. Because what, 2018, I think I was doing lots and lots. 2015 to 2018, I did lots and lots of talks in libraries and things like that, and I'd always have my books for sale. And a number of people that would say, I'd love to buy your book, but I don't have any cash on me. That once I was able to say, oh, it's great that you'd love to buy my book, I've got a card reader, they would buy your book. And I could give a talk to, say, 30 people, and I'd probably sell 20 books to 30 people, and maybe 30 books to 60 people on average. Whereas before having a card reader, I'd probably sell like 5 books to 30 people. Because people would end up coming up with the excuse they don't have any cash on them, so they can't buy my books. Because I used to offer to do library talks for free, as long as I could have my books for sale at the library talks. And for a 1 hour, I would arrive perhaps normally half an hour early, but I'd arrive half an hour early, be there for an hour for a talk, and like a 30-minute talk or a 45-minute talk, plus 15 minutes of chatting and having them buy my books and things. They shouldn't come up. Yeah, they shouldn't come up with the excuses. And so for, say, 2 hours of work, I would end up perhaps taking what, £200 or something in book sales at a small 30-person talk. Well, I think the people who were saying this, it's not like I was asking them to buy my book, as in, like, once I was off the stage. I'm not asking people to buy my book. These were people who are coming over and then shaking my hand and saying, great talk, I'd buy your book, but I don't have any money on me. People who've got common sense just kind of wave from halfway across the room and say, great talk, and then they leave. It's the ones who come over and say, oh, great talk. I would buy your book, but I've got no money. And then I'd say, oh, I've got a card reader. So that's not an excuse now, is it? Get your card out. So yes, they didn't have to say no because they didn't. There was no excuse for them to have to come over to do that in the first place. They're the ones who brought it up. Yeah, because there obviously are some people who, so in a talk with 30 people watching, 10 of them do essentially just get up and leave at the end, and 20 of them decide to come over to me and buy books. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I'm making life easier for them. They have said I'd buy your book if I had a car, if I could. There's never a fun Dan. I'm just a flat, kind of not up, not down, generally flat, non-fun person. I like to think of myself as not fun, not interesting, and someone who perhaps is best avoided. Or at least that's how I like others to perceive me. Not the kind of impression that works well on YouTube, obviously, but that is how I like others to see me. I know, every day you come back. A very confusing thing. Yes, I like to be seen as the person that no one wants to associate with. The person who can then not have to have lots of social interactions, including the social interactions of rejecting people because people don't come over in the first place. So in my normal everyday life, I get away with that. In my online life, some of you seem to have jumped on anyway, and you come back, despite me putting signs up around my swamp. I like the idea of being Shrek in a swamp, and I think some of you are Donkey and all the other friends that end up moving into the swamp and try and gradually encourage me to accept it as an acceptable normal. Yeah, exactly. I watch Shrek and I think, poor Shrek, all that harassment he's getting. He has to put up with Donkey. He has to put up with all these characters suddenly turning up, and all he wants is to be left alone in his swamp. I come back every day as well. You got to remember that. It's not normal, but I do come back every day. And I obviously am very glad that you come back every day. Yes, I was thinking that exact same question. Who gets the back and who gets the front? Yeah, I wouldn't go quite as far as to say it's evidence I want to be here. It's more evidence that I don't not want to be here enough to leave. Yes, this is the 3-hour visit to my swamp. My swamp contains lots of books. The books are like the inside of my head. Yeah. Yes, I do obviously appreciate everyone who chooses to jump into the live chat. Well, everyone who chooses to join the stream, and obviously those who are kind enough to then engage in conversation. And obviously to those who kind of have been kind enough to help monitor the live chat, to help keep idiots away, so to speak. Yes, so tomorrow obviously I'll be reading, probably, I think I've worked out that it should be for about an hour or so again, reading the next section, but it goes into language patterns. So it might be that I read for longer than an hour, but I interrupt my reading sort of with each language, because you might have questions about or want more examples or whatever. So I'll probably interrupt each language pattern after I've read one. Before I start the next one, I'll probably look, see if there's any questions, comments, maybe engage a bit, and then move on to the next language pattern, rather than just reading all of the language patterns where you'll think, wait a minute, I haven't written that down yet. Might have a question about that one. So I think there's kind of a difference depending on what I'm reading as to whether I feel that it's going to be easier to just read in one bulk and then look at questions, or read in like stages and take questions. And I think the language patterns part, at least, is probably easier to take in stages, because then I can just respond in real time to any questions if anyone has any. Yes, for me, I pretty much just, what am I doing tomorrow? I don't even know what day it is. I think it's Thursday tomorrow. Yep, my computer says Wednesday currently. So yeah, so tomorrow I, at some point, I have to get Saturday's track, YouTube track video done, and I need to edit the audio before I edit or add in sound effects. Where so I've got through, I've historically been bulk editing. Like, I'll spend a day where I'll literally just edit track after track after track, and I've been then working through that bulk of edited tracks, adding the sound effects in once a week, so that I have one day like a month where I do all the bulk editing, and then the rest of the month I'm just editing for that week or whatever, or is it in fact slightly over a month or so. Whereas now I've caught up with myself. I haven't had the time to do any more because of doing the book and trying to get the book finished, and because I'm obviously spending every night doing about 3 hours here, um, which obviously for 51 streams now is, they've been largely between 2.5 and 3 hours, I think, generally. So that's what, say 150 hours or something like that. 100 to 150 hours of streams in the last 51 days. Um, and then sometimes trying to find things beforehand to do on the streams. So yeah, so that's so I've got to do that at some point. But other than that, I try not to do too much. other work at the moment. Yes, you do keep me very busy. I don't know which story is on Saturday because I haven't edited the story yet. It will be whatever alphabetically. It will be whatever is next in the alphabet on my in my folder of 2018 stories. So I don't know, whatever the last one was, it will be whatever comes in the alphabet after that one. I can't remember what the last one was with sound effects, but literally, I've got a folder of my stories that were done before 2018, so 2017 and back. My 2018 folder, 2019 folder, 2020 folder. 2020 folder, obviously, all the stories are edited, and I just release them as I. So the non-edited ones aren't in the folder yet, but they're just like the one I did on Monday night, the one I did last week on the Monday night, and possibly the one before that. I can't remember. 2019 ones are all edited. That's fine. 2017 and earlier ones that I felt were acceptable in quality, I've edited. They're all fine. What I haven't edited is because I did a lot in 2018 purely because of the 40 I did for my 40th birthday. So what I haven't edited yet is all 40 of the plus the bonus ones that I did every time I hit 1,000 subscribers. So I think there was like 52 stories or something in 2018, and I haven't edited all of those yet. And so that's why I chose those to be the first ones I would do sound effects for, because I thought, well, I'm already editing them. So even though I've got all these others that I have already done and edited, I thought, let's just work on the ones I'm currently editing, and then I can just edit them, create a sound effects version, and then edit the next one and create a sound effect version and do that. So that's what I'm doing. Yes, cats liking my stories is good. Yep, my hair just does its own thing. I let it just fall into whatever position it chooses to fall in. Obviously, every other day, I wash it and then let it dry, and however it goes, that's how it's going to be. Every morning, I look terrifying when I wake up. I go to bed and my hair looks kind of neatish and okay and normal, and then I wake up and I look like a weird, I don't know, spiky haired, scary looking person, like I've stuck my fingers into a plug socket. It is. I've got about 2.5 minutes left. Yeah, my hair just does its own thing. What I quite like with my hair is once it reaches a length that it can flop, go sort of floppy-ish, then as it dries, it naturally just decides where its parting is going to be for the day. And sometimes it's kind of down that side, sometimes it's down that side, sometimes it's straight down the center, and it just does a nice even parting all for itself. It just makes a decision as it's drying, and all the hair seems to agree on that decision, and then it just parts itself where it wants to. No, I don't name any house plants. We do have a few house plants, but I don't name them. Right, we're 1 minute away. Obviously, this book is available. There's a link in the description. It's Hypnotherapy Revealed, the Ericksonian Approach. If anyone wants to buy it and read along or anything. Yeah, if I was asked, I'd probably say, yeah, they're all called Bob. And Yep, tomorrow I will read part 2. I'll read through another chunk of it, and then on Wednesday, no, we're on Wednesday now. Whatever the next day is after that one, Friday, I'll read part 3, and then part 4. I worked out I can do it in 4 parts. Part 4, I will read the session that's at the end of it. So you can read ahead if you want, but that's what I'll be doing. So I will see those of you who can join me tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow at 7:30 UK time. Dan, what's your name? Bob. That's the kind of thing I would tell someone. Right, I will see you later.